the story prior to closing the hearing. Understood?
Yeah, I think we understand. Sorry, I got a lot of boxes open here. The chart that you provided, I will clean up and clarify. We did have the building elevation in there, which I believe is the finished floor elevation of the parking garage. Scott might remember more than me. But the number of stories, I think we understand that the number of stories is actually 5 under the regulations for a number of the structures because the parking garage level, which is 40 or 50% underground, does count as a story in the regulations. And so we do need to adjust the number of stories in the table, and we can provide the finished floor elevation. I guess maybe if you guys just want to clarify, do you want every finished floor elevation or main floor or the parking garage level? That would probably be helpful.
So what we need to know is based on if is it 4 feet more than average, 4 feet above average pre-construction grade, or is it exposed more than 12 feet at any point? And then we can tell if what the definition is in terms of whether it counts as a story.
Is that clear? Andrew?
Is that clear to you?
Unfortunately, on my end, a lot of Marlo's comments were pretty garbled. I couldn't really know what she was saying. I think it's something we can totally work out with staff, and we don't have to necessarily spend a lot of time in this meeting.
Okay. Number 7, once the stories have been established, the board require the applicant to specifically enumerate where additional setback waivers are requested based on the determination of number of stories in front on side yards prior to closing the hearing. I do remember, John, Mark probably remind me, that we did have a list of that during one of the, I don't know if it was the master plan or the previous plan, as part of this master plan, where you had a list of these for us to review. That sounds familiar.
I think with the setback waivers, we tried to just create a more simple method. So on sheet C2, I believe the plan said, or it was an exhibit to the application. I don't have those handy, either exhibit 4 or 5 or something like that. We had just created a plan that was basically a site plan that showed the minimum setback on every side of every building in the plan. And so the concept was that, because trying to figure out what's the front and the back and the side of these buildings is a little challenging because they have roads on, 2 or some of them have roads on 3 sides, and we weren't sure what is the front, what's the back. So we basically just put the minimum setback dimensions on a plan, and so, if it was okay with staff and the board, we just assumed that, the board approves the setback, minimum setback that's shown on sheet, whatever, sheet 2 or whatever the number is. And we can look at that together or with staff and just sort of iron out, what's the easiest way to present it.
That makes sense, Andrew. I think we can help you with that. I did see your figure makes sense. It's just that there was some confusion about number of stories, so I wasn't able to evaluate whether those setbacks were waiver requests or not, because there were a number of stories, we can nail down whether you need a setback.
Okay, so if we correct that previous graph that dictates what each of the stories are of each building, then it should align with that exhibit, correct,
Yes.
Andrew? Yeah, and I think the issue is that the master plan provided a setback waiver for buildings of 5 stories. And so if these are 5 stories, they would already have a 6-foot, I think, front setback. And so some waivers wouldn't be necessary, depending on which one is the front. It's just a problem that we have to figure out. So I think that we've got that. I think, you know, the question that the board should keep in mind, sort of, it would be to just look at the site plan and in general, like, does the way that it's set up seem appropriate? And that would be sort of the feedback that we'd be looking for.
Another reminder of our discussion that was held 4 years ago regarding master plan, regarding staff comment number 8. Staff recommends the board review whether the applicant is compensated for the requested height waiver by providing high quality, varied, and complementary architecture for all buildings and landscaping to determine whether they will be preliminary grant the applicant's request for height waivers. Maximum height is 35 feet for flat roofs. In the R12 district, the applicant is asking for building heights between 52 and 69 feet above average pre-construction grade. And I do remember this discussion that happened during the master plan and how this works only if you can build up and not out. But I also remember us stipulating, Mark, do I have this right, John, that we want to make sure that that we were putting up buildings that were appealing, not just tall buildings. And I think that's where this comment comes from, if I recall. So I support going up, but I also support the idea that we need to make sure that it's high quality, varied, and complementary architecture.
Yeah, Matt, Mark here. I recall that conversation as well. And I do recall the preliminary sketches and images we did see when we were looking at it did support that. And I think we'll get further into the packet, but I've been looking at sort of like all the renderings they've been providing of the neighborhood views, and I would say that they are achieving that.
Okay, great. Thanks for that input, Mark. Anybody else?
So this is John. So I'm not an architect, Mark, you are, but I noticed that the architecture and the design of the new multi-story buildings is very different than, say, at the other end of O'Brien Farm Road, where you have Stonington and Lancaster, which is more kind of traditional New England. These new renderings look more kind of urban, industrial, you know, something you'd see in Seattle. Is that because that's where the demand is and that is the current style now?
We thought the architecture that we came up with was, first of all, I appreciate the comment, but we were looking for kind of a midway point between sort of a contemporary, more modern structure and also a little bit more classic style to, you know, be complementary to what is in the neighborhood without replicating it. So, you know, what we try to do is find some middle ground there. These buildings are also going to be prominently fronted on Kennedy. And so we want them to be handsome and with high quality materials. And, you know, we want consistency within the buildings. It doesn't mean that we want all the buildings to be identical, but we think there's a pretty good transition between the buildings. There's a lot of glass, there's masonry. We think that the flat roofs actually works well here, considering where its location is. You know, it is, again, a prominent building on a fairly heavily trafficked commuter thoroughfare. So it's a little bit different than if it's tucked back into, you know, trees and a little bit more kind of suburban. These are also bigger buildings than Lancaster or Stonington Circle. So, you know, you're trying to find kind of that mix, appropriate mix.
Thank you, Evan.
No problem.
Okay, moving on to staff comment number 9. This is talking about inclusionary, just for, and Paul, well, Paul's not on, but Marla or Delilah can correct me. As I'm learning, we've got an inclusionary housing ordinance that's pending. It's been warned, and it will likely be adopted, but it's not officially adopted yet. The city council, I believe they extended it last night, or they continued it last night. but we have an inclusionary housing ordinance that will likely be adopted that this project is attempting to comply with the goal of providing more affordable housing for the city of South Burlington. So that's just the short background. Sandy or John with the Affordable Housing Committee give a lot better explanation than I can. But that's the background for staff comment number 8. Staff recommends the board require the applicant to provide 3 additional inclusionary units. If the applicant adds 3 inclusionary units, they may add up to 51 offset units, which would make their proposed 390 units allowable without amending the master plan. There's a lot of math here in the preceding paragraph. First, ask the applicant, do you agree with the staff's math here? And what's your comment based on that question?
So just to give a little background on this, we did have this project designed before the inclusionary zoning requirement was really even finalized and went up to City Council. We chose to work with the Affordable Housing Committee to, collaborate, and we've chosen to implement it into our project, even though it's not yet a regulation. With what I think is kind of the question here is based on the ceiling of inclusionary units that are required, and then a little bit of what our understanding is as to the individual unit counts based on bedroom units, because there is a calculation in our understanding, maybe that's not going to be the final regulation, but if you have bigger units with more bedrooms, you can actually somewhat decrease based on that bedroom count. With that said, we're working with Champlain Housing Trust on fulfilling this requirement, so we don't want to necessarily predict 100% what Champlain Housing Trust program is going to look like. So we're fine with just saying, the requirement is 51 units, and when the final regulation comes out, we'll comply with it. Okay. Does that make sense to staff?
So, Evan, I think generally that makes sense because this is preliminary plat. Just to clarify for the board's sake, because those changes to the regulations have been warned and this complete preliminary plat application was submitted after the warning, this project is subject to those regulations retroactively when they are adopted. It's on the warning date. So I think you're right. If there's any minor modifications, those should be addressed at final plat. But those regulations will apply to this project, assuming they're adopted. And I take your point about there is a slightly different calculation if you have higher numbers of bedrooms. I think that needs to be kind of spelled out at the final plat level if that's the approach you're going to take, which is just fine, and you're completely welcome to under the new regulation, but we do need to understand fully how that's being calculated.
Understood. I don't mean to split hairs on this because it's kind of neither here nor there, because we are complying with it, and we did submit after the fact, but we had a project designed and we're ready to submit, and could have submitted in advance of the warning of the inclusionary housing requirement, but chose to work with the Affordable Housing Committee to include this. And affordable housing is part of O'Brien Brothers' mission and has been for decades. So I just want to make that point. So,
right. Thank you, Evan. Now, part of the inclusionary housing.
This conference will now be recorded.
One thing I do want to clarify, though, to the point of the math, Hillside did receive a final plat amendment to reduce the number of homes in the Hillside neighborhood from 118 to 115. So there are actually 343 units available in the master plan for the apartments. And so we're only actually utilizing 47 offset units to get to the 390. We fell a few units short of full density in the plan. So that does impact, because you're not allowed to take advantage of the reduction in inclusionary units based on the number of bedrooms if you took advantage of an offset unit. And so the reduction of units, I think, only applies to the 3 or 4 units that are, it's not really relevant, but there are 115 homes in Hillside, not 118. And so we can proceed and work out, the details moving forward. But I did want to clarify that.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Appreciate that. leading up to still on affordable housing, some of the inclusionary housing requirements are on page 5 of the packet. I think one in particular with regards to comment number 10 is item number 6 with regards to there should be no indications from comment areas that these units are inclusionary units. And comment number 10 is the applicant is proposing to locate 48 inclusionary units in a single building, assuming the deficiency in the number of units can be remedied, which I think it can. We just heard. Staff recommends the board ask the applicant to demonstrate how the location of these units meet these criteria. I assume that's the Marla Delilah. I assume that's the criteria you're referring to with regards to ensuring that there's not any segregation of inclusionary units versus market rate units.
Right, so if you go back up to the middle of the previous page, inclusionary units required under this section shall be, and then there's a whole list of things that they shall be. Constructed on site, integrated into the overall project layout, no less energy efficient, same exterior materials, stuff about the size, stuff about the type. So we would invite the applicant to describe sort of how their inclusionary units meet all the requirements of the distribution of inclusionary units.
Well, the inclusionary units are going to be located immediately across the street from the market rate units, so it's not as though they're tucked away in an undesirable location. We are working with a reputable provider of affordable housing, Champlain Housing Trust. So I think, everybody should be fairly comfortable with the fact that they are not going to be delivering a subpar styled architecture or unit layout. And we will also be ensuring that in whatever deal we finally end up with them. We need the site to be commensurate in quality with all of the units. And it's also immediately adjacent to our ongoing development of single family and townhomes too. So I believe our objectives are aligned with the cities on this point and the affordable housing committees. Yeah, to the specific points in the zoning regulation, we had a long conversation with the Affordable Housing Committee and had actually worked with them to add the text that says that this criterion may be achieved in a single building or in multiple buildings. And the point there was that throughout the conversation with the Affordable Housing Committee, my understanding was that a model that they had envisioned was the model that we're moving forward with in partnering with Champlain Housing Trust to produce these affordable units. And we had submitted a letter for the record this morning from Champlain Housing Trust voicing their support for the location of the inclusionary units and for the, project moving forward here at this location, just to make sure that you guys saw that. If you didn't, we can get it to you again. The other questions, the exterior materials, as you can see in the renderings, are substantially identical. The energy efficiency is substantially identical. The unit sizes will certainly meet the minimums specified in the ordinance. And I'm trying to look at the last one. That applies to for sale units, it seems like. So I do think that we've touched on the majority of the specifics. And the average mean number of bedrooms will certainly be in line with the rest of the project. The whole project is producing 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. Champlain Housing Trust building, I believe we'll have some 3-bedroom apartments in it, as well as 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. And that was sort of in line with their understanding of the demand. So we feel pretty good about it. Curious what you guys think.
Anyone on the board want to comment regarding this agenda item number 10 or the staff comment number 10?
I have a question.
I'd like to hear from the Affordable Housing Committee, Sandy or John. If we can't hear from them at the end of public comments, we'll hopefully reach out to them for their opinion at the next continuing hearing. But first, I want to hear from the board.
Man, it's John.
Hey, John.
I think this is a completely reasonable answer to figuring out in that we approve things for Champlain Housing Trust all the time, and I think it's an effective way to do it. I think the inclusionary style of it is not what we're used to seeing, but this is a vastly larger project and therefore can handle this. So I don't have a problem with it, but I can understand how having a single building does identify the users as lower moderate income.
Can I ask a question, Matt?
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
So these 48 or 51 affordable units are all going to be in the same building. Will that building contain any market rate units?
I think that
It's not intended to, no.
from time to time, I think Champlain Housing Trust does do market rate units, but in this case, it would not.
So this is John. Does CHT require that all of the units be congregated as opposed to dispersed among the many or the number of 4-story buildings? Because in another project, we had an issue with the density of the inclusionary units and concerns about identifying who is inclusionary and who isn't. So I'd love some clarity about this from either
I don't want
Mark.
to speak on that.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, who was the question directed towards, Don?
Well, it could either be you guys or Marla. I'm a little confused why this is different than what we have previously experienced with other applicants. And it might be the some CHT requirements. I'm just trying to figure out how we justify aggregating all the inclusionary units in one building as opposed to dispersing them throughout the 4 or 5 4-story buildings.
Dawn, this is Marla. These are different requirements than the board saw recently for the other project. These are the requirements that have been drafted in coordination with the Affordable Housing Committee that lay out the way the Affordable Housing Committee wants to see units distributed.
Fine.
So I would encourage you to look at, but there is, like all things in the LDR, there is some room for interpretation. So, I would encourage everyone on the board to look closely at these requirements and make the interpretation on these requirements rather than comparing it apples to apples, though it's probably more like, apples to pears. It's not quite apples to oranges.
Thank you.
Okay.
I just wondered what the rationale was, so thank you for that.
From a process point of view, is these inclusionary housing ordinance, does it then become the affordable housing, replace the affordable housing language in the existing LDRs?
It replaces 1801, 1802 and 1803 remain.
Could I make a comment? This is Sandy Dooley.
Oh, Sandy Dooley from the Affordable Housing Committee. I normally don't do this, but because you're on a city committee, I would like to hear from you. Go ahead, Sandy.
Well, I just wanted to say, I was on the board of CHT for 9 years. The DRB in South Burlington approved housing behind Shaw's, in which the buildings owned by CHT are almost exclusively affordable. But generally, even the Garden Street apartments in City Center, they have market rate housing in them to allow some flexibility, because people that live that are within the income ranges of the affordability requirements don't necessarily stay in those income ranges. Something's wrong. Can you hear me? Anyway, and so I don't know the specifics about this, but their management of a building, which will, I assume, be the responsibility of CHT. I sympathize with the, I guess you could say, the ideal of having the units dispersed, but there are all kinds of constraints on that. Another example of a single building, which I think has worked very well, is the development on North Avenue, just beyond the North Avenue Shopping Center. That has has market rate buildings. That's a collaboration between CHT and Cathedral Square, and Eric Farrell's did the market rate units there. So there are a wide variety of reasons why there are situations in which having all the affordable units in one building seems to be the best path. I would be interested in whether that building is anticipated to be 100% affordable, because I'm not aware of that in the past on the part of CHT.
Sandy, this is Dawn. Thank you. That's helpful, a helpful perspective.
Okay. You're welcome.
I'd like, this is John Simpson, and I wanted to support what Sandy said, and the other advantage of having CHT involved is that we are requiring in the ordinance, we're requiring perpetual affordability. And by having CHT involved, it will make sure that that happens. And so I support the idea of having them involved. And if this is the way that the developer and CHT have worked out the solution to how to design it, I'm all for it.
Okay, thank you, John and Sandy, also both on the Affordable Housing Committee. Thank you for your real-time comments there. Anyone else on the board who want? Go ahead.
Yeah, Mark here. And obviously, the previous project that we all, are aware of and recently had discussions about we discussed quite, at length, distributing them for the purposes of not, specifically identifying and targeting. Clearly, the language has changed in the LDRs for what the exclusionary units and how they can be integrated. And, basically it says, when they're integrated into an overall project, this criteria may be achieved in a single building or multiple buildings. Our regulations have changed from the way we reviewed it previously, and therefore the way they proposed it in a single building, it meets the criteria under our regulations at this point. So.
Thanks, Mark.
Yep.
I agree with Mark, and I think, in the same boat that Mark was on the other application. But this removes any ambiguity about distribution.
Okay. Staff comment number 11. This is regards to phasing or when we don't want this the building which has the affordable units to be built last, so it doesn't get built at all. But we would like some wants the applicant to propose how he'll comply with this criterion to make sure that the market rate units and the affordable units are built correctly. Are you expanding on that, Evan?
Yeah, so in our conversations, we've been working primarily with Michael Monte and Amy Dimitrowicz from Champlain Housing Trust, and we've asked them, how they've come up with agreements with municipalities in the past, and they said that, it's somewhat of a negotiation, but they're happy, signing on to the commitment. And I think that we're looking for a little bit of guidance, maybe from the DRB and staff, as to how we'd like to draw up that commitment. But we're open to suggestions there. I think it's important to probably have CHT in that conversation, and I don't believe anybody from CHT is currently on the line. But for instance, they have a written agreement with the city of Burlington for the Cambrian Rise project, which Sandy, I believe, is just referencing on North Ave.
Yeah, I think the idea is that CHT, is taking responsibility to construct the building, within a time frame that they can provide and certify to the city in some fashion. And so that would be the goal, would be to come up with some sort of agreement or representation of a sufficient nature to the city and to the board that that work was going to happen in a timely manner. And so with the ordinance being, brand new, obviously there's a little bit of learning to do, I think, for us on exactly what that looks like. But that is the working concept.
So I would ask, what would the board like to see in terms of timing?
I'm sorry, what do you mean in terms of timing, Marla?
So one of the requirements of the new inclusionary zoning is that they be constructed and made available for occupancy concurrently with the market rate units. They have to present a phasing plan. And so since there are 6 buildings and one of them will be all the inclusionary units, what is the appropriate timeline for that construction to occur relative to the other buildings?
And just to provide a little background on this, part of this has to do with CHT receiving funding sources to be able to move forward with development. So that's really the kind of the question mark that hangs over the timing piece, and why, I don't think they can commit today to, breaking ground as soon as we have final permits unless they receive their funding.
And how does it to the project, Evan, will they know that so that we could have a no later than kind of stipulation?
Yeah, so I think that's where we would like to have CHT involved in that conversation. Yearly there are funding sources that become available to them, and sometimes they receive the funding they're looking for and sometimes they don't. But what they've said is they are committed to this site. There's a definitive need here, and they like the site for a variety of reasons. So they're definitely moving forward on achieving funding for it. Perhaps Sandy and John might actually have more insight into their process than we do.
But I think what we're getting at, Evan, is that there's 6 buildings. Are you building them one by one, 2 in a row, 2 together, or all of them at once?
I think the intent would be that 2 of the market rate buildings are the first to start off with the affordable either running concurrent or immediately thereafter. But the intent isn't to do 6 buildings all at once, I guess,
Right.
to answer the question.
So your affordable might be your 5th, and your last market rate might be your 6th building.
Correct. And I think that's, a decent amount of leverage for the city to withhold is, the affordable units have to be delivered before the last market rate units are delivered. And the intent would be that we would certainly deliver them well in advance of that. But again, part of that is a little bit ambiguous to us at the moment, or amorphous.
But I think the bonus that you get, certainly shouldn't build on the bonus before you build the affordable. I mean, I think that's clear, and I don't think that would ever be your intention. But certainly we want to make sure that that the affordable housing building isn't the last one to go and becomes an afterthought in this process.
Yeah, so maybe what we could provide is kind of an outline of a structure that CHT would propose to the city before the next meeting.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea.
Okay.
Make sure their timeline's within your timeline,
Yeah, and we'll also try and have CHT, someone from them on the line next time as well.
Okay. If there's nothing else on affordable housing, I would go to agenda item C, plan unit development standards, and staff comment number 12. The applicant has received preliminary water allocation, has provided an estimate of wastewater flows. Staff recommends the board require the applicant to apply for and obtain preliminary wastewater allocation prior to applying for final plat. Is that agreed, understood?
That's no problem. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Staff comment number 13, staff recommends the board require the applicant to incorporate the comments of South Burlington Water Department into their plans at final plat.
I can speak to that. This is Scott Homestead. Typically, what I would do is after this meeting, I will set up a meeting with South Burlington Water District and just go in and basically do exactly what they want. These comments are easy and much easier to hash out in a 15-minute meeting than to do a lot of back and forth on it. I'm not concerned about it at all.
Okay, thank you for that, Scott. Agenda item 14 regarding circulation. Since phase 2 trips are now projected to be so much lower than they were in estimated 2016, staff recommends the board require the applicant to evaluate whether the proposed intersection geometry is still important. Maybe a brief discussion on why we're expecting fewer trips. Marla or Evan, whoever.
Yeah, the change there, I think, is driven by the fact that we're in the original master plan, we had included the full amount of residential density units as well as up to 45,000 square feet of commercial, because at that point we weren't 100% locked in, or we didn't have a fully fleshed out plan as to what was going here. So with that 45,000 square feet of commercial, it drove those trip ends up. So, Marla and staff are correct in that, the trip ends are reduced fairly significantly. When we're having our engineer take a look at this, my assumption is that there's probably not going to be a big change to that intersection onto Kennedy as a result, but we'll certainly take a look at it.
Okay. Marla, is that, can you explain the geometry a little bit to me?
Yeah, I'd love to.
We can show, is there another, something you can show, Delilah?
Yeah,
I'm
hold on.
not sure that we submitted road plans because they were, actually I did resubmit them. They were one of the exhibits.
We've got him. Just a second. Stand by. Are there road plans? Yep. So if you're in the full PDF of the whole agenda item, it's page 63. Or if you're in the pieces, it's page 50. I have the advantage of having actually in these things. I know where it is in Port Delilah. Catch up. Port Delilah. Catch up.
Anyone can draw on this if they want to point something out.
I'm still seeing the text.
Yeah, we're still seeing the staff comments.
There we go.
Excellent.
So we're looking sort of down here. I'm going to try and circle. This project has proposed an additional turn lane on Kennedy Drive, and then coming out from the project, a left and a right onto Kennedy Drive. So the question is, now that they've reduced the trips by almost half, is this geometry still the proposed geometry, or is something that's smaller, I guess, more appropriate? And you're welcome to, and anyone can zoom in on what we're seeing on the screen as well.
I'm sorry, this is Dawn. I stepped out to close some windows because it's getting chilly outside. Why do we have a theory on why the trips have been reduced?
So the trips have been reduced because the previous trip estimate included a large amount of commercial square footage. That commercial square footage is no longer proposed. And and correct me if I'm wrong, Evan and Andrew, but at Sketch, you said you weren't going to be doing that commercial.
That's correct.
Right. Yeah.
There's no
The
commercial.
affordable
Garages are
housing,
minor.
yeah, the once we increased the unit count, it took the space of the previously assigned to the commercial user.
Right, so residential units generate significantly fewer trips than commercial space.
Thank you for that explanation.
Okay. I'm not a road engineer, so I don't know if we still need it, but my inclination is to say.
So we'll look at that with our traffic engineer who did the original study and get a recommendation. Also keeping in mind the context of the plan that we're pursuing on the other end of the site and the future potential of the intersection as well. So I'll get a letter or some sort of memo from him, which hopefully we can get to you prior to the next meeting on the 16th or 19th, or whatever the day was.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Item number 15. At this more formal stage of review, staff recommends the board require the applicant to remove the head-on parking. This is on Two Brothers Drive. And if the applicant desires, replace it with parallel parking spaces. This is, I'm zooming in here on Marlo's map. Can someone circle where we're talking about?
Delilah, can you go to a plan that shows the project? Are you in the plans PDF or are you in the overall? Because I can help you find the right page if you tell me which PDF you're in.
And she's in the overall.
Which page would have what you need, Marla? I've got them both open now. And can you see both my screens?
No, but it's okay. Are you in the one with the staff comments and the plans or the one with just the plans?
I am in the one with the staff comments, and staff comments is on the left with the plans, and just staff comments is on the right.
Okay, so the one with the staff comments and the plans, go to plan page 31. If you would, please. Thanks for your patience, everyone. So these guys, you want to zoom into those?
I'll zoom into there. Hold on. It's going to move your drawing, but I'll erase that. Sorry.
So with regard to those parking spaces, our understanding is those spaces are fully approved in the existing Hillside final plat. They are currently soon to be under construction, as that section of road is likely to be under construction this year. And so I believe there might be, so when we had done our sketch plan hearing a while ago, we had put a club building at the top of the hill, like right above where lot 10 and lot 11 are. And we had increased that 6 spaces to become like 17 spaces. And the spaces rounded the corner, and there was a lot of concern that that was a safety hazard and that it didn't work with the grading. There were all kinds of problematic. All of those additional spaces have been removed. And so we're just to the 6 spaces I believe are part of the current plan. And so I'm not sure that this permit proceeding will be done in time to change those, and they're probably going to be being built this summer. So I'm not sure that there's much we can do on these.
Is that right, Marlo? This is those parking spaces are part of a previously approved plan? Is that your?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'm not calling Kevin a liar, or Andrew a liar. I'm just saying it's not something that I had been made aware of before. So, you know, a lot of this project proceeded before my time. That may be the case. I guess if that's the case, then it's been approved. If it's not, would the board like to see those removed?
Matt, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So, Evan, I think you made a comment that they were put in place when there was originally going to be a clubhouse in that proximity. Is that clubhouse not happening now?
So correct. So when we had our sketch plan hearing for this preliminary plat for these 6 commercial lots, we were looking at expanding the master plan to put the clubhouse at the top of the hill. We since pulled that aspect of the project out after the sketch plan. And so the spaces have always been there. They're part of the hillside final plat. The conversation with the board was, what if somebody who lives at lot 771 has a small gathering and they have extra people, where do their guests park? And guest parking predominantly is along Eldridge Street in this neighborhood. There's, 100 spots on Eldridge Street, but we sort of wanted to have a few spots nearer to the folks on the far end of Two Brothers Drive, so that if they had a couple extra cars, that they weren't double parked in the road. That's where those 6 spaces came from and why they're in the plan. And we had, like I said, we had expanded it when we were looking to put a club up there, but we've since pulled that back, and the spaces shown, I believe, are just existing approved spaces.
Is the concern, Marla, that the cars will be backing out and from a safety aspect, or is it from we just don't need that much space or that much parking?
Purely safety. We generally don't have head-in parking on roads.
Yeah, you're gonna back out there and I don't know what is it, 15 miles an hour on the. Yeah. But if it's part of it, if it is indeed checking our paperwork, part of the already approved plat, you'd have to have an amendment to that. Would they have to have an amendment to switch to parallel there?
Right.
And the applicant may not want to switch to parallel there. Is that right, Andrew and Evan?
You wouldn't get as many spaces with parallel.
Right. So
from my memory of that conversation, it was more to Andrew's point that it was looking for guest parking, overflow parking, because there wasn't much public parking on that end of the project, whereas on the 3 cul-de-sac roads and down closer to the townhomes, there was, but on Two Brothers Drive on the east end, the northeast end, there's just not a lot of parking.
right. So so what you're saying is you want that.
I think our preference would be to keep that, unless the board really has a strong feeling that it's problematic.
Well, I think first we got to get to the fact: is it part of this project, or I see the safety aspect. I'd rather have parallel there. I also understand you need parking spaces. I think my first question, or my follow-up question, is it part of an already approved plan, or is it part of this plan? And I think we can figure that out, before we meet again on this continued project. So I don't know how the rest of the board feels about that, but we can also discuss it once we know more, when we confirm next time we meet on this.
They can't clean it.
Yeah,
Okay.
why don't we see where things are in terms of which project it's part of?
Yeah, and we're going to continue this, so we'll be able to do that at that time.
Yeah, we're fine with that.
That makes sense to me. And I will say, as a resident there, guest parking is an issue, and I live as close to the Eldridge Street parking as possible, but it's still kind of a hassle for people. So I agree with Mark. Let's wait and see which side it falls on.
Okay, this is the 15-minute bell. In order for us to get to all the agenda items we're going to get to, we're going to try to get through some more staff comments before we call time out, before we continue this project for a later date. For those of you that are interested in this project or listening, we are seeing your comments in the chat box. We do welcome emails, and there will be ample opportunity to speak on the record on your phone or in Zoom when this is continued, and stay tuned for when it'll be continued to. But before I give you the 10-minute, we're gonna continue this in 10 minutes. Is there any specific staff comment I should jump ahead to, Evan or Andrew or Scott, that would help provide guidance going forward before we come back? Or do you just want me to keep going in order? In other words, is there anything you need from us in the next 15 minutes in order to put together responses the next time you come back for this?
I don't think so. Andrew, do you have anything that's burning on here that we need?
All right, well then let's just go in order. Let's go 16 right now, regarding trees. Staff considers the board should require the applicant to provide a plan showing protection for the trees to remain at final plat. Staff considers such information can be incorporated into the required erosion prevention and sediment control plans. These are two areas where existing trees are proposed to be retained in the vicinity of work proposed for this project. Is that agreeable to the applicant?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, 17, the pool. There's a whole section here regarding open space and what we're doing in this project. Other open spaces are shown as grassy areas and suburban areas. Staff recommends that with this density, the board should discuss with the applicant the need to include open spaces that fit the urban form. These suggestions from staff include create lawn areas near stormwater treatment practices, use of empty spaces adjacent to buildings to create urban pocket parks, barbecue areas, and small nooks for residents' enjoyment using benches, seating walls, and permeable pavers. Create top floor spaces like those found in other apartment buildings in South Burlington. Show clear access to the existing stormwater park loop of building 14 and consider adding amenities to that space. Show a plan to connect the parks in the pending master plan to the southeast. The applicant has indicated the open space within lot 13 will be a swimming pool. Any swimming pool must meet the safety requirements of Article 3, which staff considers can be reviewed at final plat. That's just a reminder. But item number 17, staff does recommend the board discuss with the applicant who will be able to use the open space area within lot 13 and whether it will be restricted to times of year, times of day, and consider whether the open spaces in the multifamily area taken in aggregate are adequate. So who gets to use the pool and the park? Kevin? Andrew?
So if for those folks that were on the board during the initial master plan approval, as you probably remember, we discussed the open space quite at length over these issues, and it was discussed holistically in context with the residential neighborhood, and then also looking at using some of the landscape dollars, because this is more of an urban site, and we're going to have an extensive amount of landscape dollars to use on a site that is primarily covered with built space. And so we made the request and I believe got approval from the board to use those landscape dollars for things other than, just typical traditional landscaping on open space. And so really what we're asking the board is to stick with the original master plan approval, understanding that this is a dense site. The pool level or the amenity level on lot 13 is intended for those market rate units because they're the ones that are going to be paying for it. But the rest of the open space, green space would be for all of the residents.
Would you say the pool for the market, are you talking about the 5 of the 6 buildings? Or are you talking about one specific building? Or are you talking about?
It would be for the buildings that are retained by O'Brien Brothers, because they're going to be essentially paying for those amenities in building 13 in their rent.
I see.
So are you saying only building 13 residents would have access to the pool, or buildings through 16 but for building 12? Except minus
It would be
building.
all of the buildings that are essentially paying into the association that are paying for that pool. So it may not include all of those residential buildings, but it will undoubtedly include more than just building 13.
Matt, can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
All right, but now when you talked about the fact that much of this site's going to be built, so a lot of the landscaping dollars are going to go to amenities other than pure landscaping, is some of the landscaping budget money going to be used to build this pool complex area?
No, the landscaping dollars that would be allocated to be used on the overall site would not be dedicated to the construction of that pool.
Okay.
I think Matt made an important point, though. This is about more than just the pool. This is about open spaces. At Sketch, the board talked about while they understand there's open spaces that are approved for this master plan area, some of those open spaces are very remote from these buildings, particularly that public park down at the other end, the football-shaped park. And the request was made by the board to have some nod towards small spaces, not necessarily for, grand recreation, but to, bring a lawn chair outside and, your sandwich or your book or whatever. Can you guys talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we haven't done the full landscape drawings for the project yet because it wasn't a requirement for the preliminary plat submission. I think there are places in the project where benches or picnic tables or small, barbecue grill areas could certainly fit in. We'll absolutely look at using every, flat spot that we can find to have some sort of amenity of, of that nature for the units. I think that makes perfect sense. So, I would say future landscape plans will look to find those areas where those items can fit and to put them in there, and to show you guys sort of what we can do. Recognizing that those lots in our master plan were approved for 90% coverage, I believe. And so, the idea has been from the beginning that these were going to be very dense lots, but those types of things can fit and should fit, and we certainly will get them in there somewhere.
It's also worth noting that, what's not shown on the page that's being shown right now is the stormwater area to the immediate south of this, which is landscaped, has a path network, and will continue to have additional amenities that are associated with this site. And that is immediately adjacent and proximate for the residents of these multifamily buildings.
And I think that the comment also mentions the pending master plan. And so it would be worth noting, I can't really draw on the screen, but there is a park in the pending master plan planned for essentially trying to see how I can sort of draw on it, where the entrance that's furthest to the right on the screen, there's an entrance to a little parking lot. Across the street from that is planned to be a park in the newly submitted master plan. Yeah, it's right there. So that's worth noting as well as the numerous new connections and trails and things that are planned to head into this area from that plan, to the point of potentially showing this in context of that master plan at a future hearing would be helpful as well, and we can certainly do that.
I do appreciate that, Andrew. But of course, we want to make sure this project can stand on its own with its own park. So I also appreciate the detail that you mentioned earlier about making sure that you show pocket parks with benches or whatnot in flat space, because I think that's important as well.
Yeah, Matt, can I just make one comment? Because I think that this is an important issue, especially with this plan that's up on the screen, because you're looking at 4 to 5 story apartment buildings, and there's not a lot of green space. It's basically parking lot and then the islands for the parking lot and street trees. I don't see a lot of opportunity for little pocket parks and benches and any kind of recreation space. I know we're talking about the stormwater area between the development and Kennedy Drive, but I think we need to see how that's actually going to be utilized as a public usage space.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I think we're going to do, if there's no other comments about green space and open space, I think we're going to
This
do.
is Dawn. I have a comment. So,
yes, please, Dawn.
Did you, Andrew and Evan, did you develop Lancaster? Was that an O'Brien property?
It was an O'Brien property to begin with, that was permitted and then sold
Okay,
to another builder.
because I
Either.
by it all the time, and there's a lot of trees, and there's benches got scattered, and I'm stunned by how occupied those benches are. At one point, I thought they might be blow up dummies, like you see in the city in the the express lanes or something, because there are always people sitting, and then other people bring their chairs around, and I think that's wonderful. So if there's any way of incorporating that kind of concept, I think that would be great.
Thank you, Don.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
I think
we like that idea.
I think we can fit some things in, and I think we will, and we'll show you guys, where they're going. And I think that, Matt, to your point, it is an adjacent master plan that has that open space, but this master plan that was approved with these lots also has significant open space that's not on the screen currently. And so perhaps, getting some perspective in terms of the whole development and the open spaces that are available. As Evan mentioned, there's a large open space immediately down page of the three buildings. At the
Mark, I don't know
left,
if you were misunderstanding what I was referring to, but I wasn't referring to the space in between building or lot 15 and Kennedy. It's that large area to the south that's right now just shown as white.
And is that the sort of funky shaped one that meanders in between the rows to the football park?
there's a bunch
No,
of
it's immediately along Kennedy and backs up to the three southernmost buildings in this, and then on the south and east or south and west side backs up to an existing condo project.
You can actually see the path that connects to it sort of in the center at the bottom of the like, if you zoom in, you can see the little stub at the far left in the middle building.
I
That
think
stub
the next,
goes into the, right there, yep. That goes
I think
into
at
the
next
open
meeting,
space.
I think at the next meeting, especially with this big change to pretty much predominantly all residential, you're bringing a lot more residents, a lot more potential for, evening and weekend usage. I'd like to see some more information specifically on the open space utilization for the site.
So this is the point in the program where I hit pause. And I thank the applicants for their patience, and I thank those that wish to make public comment. Thank you to Barb Service and Melissa Cronin for filling up the chat box. I encourage you to put some of these questions in an email form as well, if you like, anyone listening. And I encourage you to come to the next meeting. We're about to continue it, and there'll be ample opportunity for public comment as well. But when we pick up where we left off at the next hearing, we certainly want to talk about open space, about the stormwater and the site plan review. But we do have a busy agenda tonight. So, and this is a very big project, and we're not going to rush through it. We want to make sure everyone has a chance to speak. So with that, I would move that we continue SP 2016 for July 7th.
Second.
Seconded by Don. And roll call. Brian Sullivan?
Aye.
Don Philibert?
Aye.
Jim Langdon?
Aye.
John Wilkie?
Aye.
Alyssa Portman?
Aye.
Mark Bear?
Aye.
And Matt Cota votes aye. Okay, so this meeting is continued to July 7th. Thank you very much for those attending. We'll now go to agenda item number 7.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is this ours as well?
Don't go too far. Don't go too far, Evan. Agenda item number 7, continued master plan application MP 2001 of O'Brien Farm Road LLC to amend a previously approved master plan for a planned unit development to develop 39.16 acres with a maximum of 458 dwelling units of 45,000 square feet of office space. The amendment is to add 0.6 acres to the Zone 2A without changing the approvals or use for that zone, to remove 0.6 acres from Zone 7 at 255 Kennedy Drive. Who is here for the applicant?
Evan Langfeld. Andrew Gill.
Evan, welcome back. Now, we continue this item from April 7th. We didn't have any further questions. The applicant requested we continue this item to this hearing so that no amendment would be made prior to the initial review of SD 2016, the related preliminary plat application. Staff recommends the board ask the applicant whether they are comfortable closing this hearing, incorporating that feedback into their determination of whether to close this item at this time. So where are you guys at with this?
I think that we would like to just continue this right along with the preliminary plat. If that works for you all.
Okay.
It'll create a little bit of a complication with the future phases, and it should just sort of progress simultaneously, if that works.
All right, with that, I move that we continue MP 2001 of O'Brien Farm Road LLC to July 7th. Do I have a second?
Second, John.
Seconded by John Wilking. Roll call, Brian Sullivan,
Aye.
Don Philibert,
Aye.
Jim Langdon,
Aye.
John Wilking,
Aye.
Melissa Portman,
Aye.
Mark Bear.
Aye.
Matt Cota, chair votes aye, and this item is continued until July 7th. Evan and Andrew, thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to open up the next three agenda items concurrently. If that is okay with staff and the applicant. We're going to open agenda item 8, 9, and 10. Site plan application SB 20-020, site plan application SB 20-021, and miscellaneous application MS 20-03. Who is here for the applicant?
Hi, it's Robin Jeffers here for the applicant from SD Ireland and South Village Communities. And I believe with me are Patrick O'Brien and Dave Marshall.
That's correct.
That's there.
Dave Marshall here.
Hi, Dave. Yep. So we got Dave and Patrick. Great. And this is a site plan application. So I'd ask all three of you to raise your right hand and swear to tell the truth under penalty of perjury.
I do.
I do.
Okay. Thank you. Robin, Patrick, David, I don't know who wants to take the lead here, but here we are again. Tell us a little bit about why we're back here with this project and a little bit about the history, if you could. Whoever would like to give a short synopsis.
We are back here with two lots 4A and 4B on Aiken Street, and they are, as you enter the development, as you come up Allen Road East from Spear Street, you would take your immediate right. There are three houses, and then there are two vacant lots. And we have been, this is actually our third time coming in for these lots for relatively the same buildings. We had a hard time with, during the recession and financing these buildings. So our previous approvals ran out, and so we have more favorable lending conditions and buying conditions, and so we're back to get these reapproved.
So the last, Marla, maybe you could, the last approval we gave to this was when? Was that in 2018, 2019? When was the last time we looked at these building spaces?
So those buildings were most recently approved, let's see, I'll say, in 2011. So it's been quite some time.
Oh, okay, I didn't realize it was that long. Okay, so what we're seeing is some changes. So these are looking at the comments are reflecting looking at these buildings as if they were seen for the first time, right? Not based on a previous approval. Is that correct, Marla?
Right.
Okay. All right. The site plan application is to construct 12-unit, 3-story multifamily buildings with underground parking on existing 0.53 acre lot 4A at 64 Aiken Street. In addition, there's a building that's very similar right next door. So the first comments we'll step through will address lot 4A, but a lot of the comments and the answers that we receive will be relevant to the building next door at lot 4B. Okay, so if we can start with comment number 1. dealing with coverage. The applicant has indicated they would like to provide an overall coverage of 72%. The master plan approval increased the allowable lot coverage for multifamily buildings from 35% to 65%. The board may choose to grant a further waiver of overall coverage to 72% in this case if the overall approved coverage of 13.9% and the SEQNR coverage of 35% allowed in the LDR is not exceeded. Staff recommends the board grant this waiver if the applicant demonstrates that the other coverage limits are not exceeded. Is that agreeable for the applicant? Can you demonstrate that?
Yes, Dave Marshall from CEA verified the overall coverage is 14.97%. So we're only halfway to what is allowed in an overall. Thus, we're well in compliance on the site overall, and we are respectfully asking for that waiver for 72% for this lot and its neighbor on the following application.
Okay. Any comments on the board regarding coverages? Okay. Item number 2, staff recommends the board require the applicant to comply with the comments of the city stormwater section. Staff considers these comments can be incorporated as conditions of approval. Is that acceptable to the applicant?
Yes, we agree.
Okay. Item number 3, this project was required under the master plan approval to obtain individual site plan approval. Staff assumes no water allocation was obtained for this particular building as part of phase 1 approvals. Staff recommends the board require the applicant to obtain a preliminary water and wastewater allocations as a condition of approval. Approvals issued more than 10 years ago are no longer valid. Is that understood and is that acceptable?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. Item number 4, staff recommends the board require the applicant to address the comments of the fire chief prior to closing the hearing. The fire chief reviewed the plans in May of 22nd. Said for FMO to access water hydrant on the same side of the street as the 212 plexus set up properly, one hydrant and serve both XTCs. Not sure a turning template will make the curve to access the west side of the building. I don't know if that has happened in between then and now, but we're recommending that it should before closing.
Okay, we have spoken to the fire department, Ed Spooner and both the chief at length yesterday and today, and
Okay.
we are agreed to install the hydrant on the same side of the street. And we
Okay.
did submit to them a turning template with their ladder truck on it. And they have responded to us in an email that they are good with that. And their only request was that we have mountable curb at the entrance and the exit, and we're amenable to that as well.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Item number 5, regarding residential design. Staff recommends the board require the applicant to calculate how much translucent windows and surfaces are oriented to the south so that the board may evaluate compliance with this criteria. This criteria being a minimum of 35% of the translucent windows and surfaces should be oriented to the south. Is this calculation something you can do prior to the close?
Yes, we did our calculations and we determined that we have 22% glazing. And we recognize that that's different than what the ordinance says, saying that they should be 35%. So we reached out to Efficiency Vermont because we build to their code. And we'd like to read out loud to you an email that was submitted in the follow-up stuff, but it's very short. So we'd just like to read it for your benefit.
Go ahead.
Thank you. It says, "Hi, Patrick, good to hear from you. As a starting place, our high-performance multifamily new construction program includes a cap on the percent of window glazing. Specifically, to meet our program requirements for multifamily, the window-to-wall area ratio should be 20% or less. There are several reasons for this. In our heating-dominated climate zone, and considering the number of sunny hours we experience in winter, insulated wall cavities will measurably outperform passive heating from the south-sided windows every time. If air conditioning would be included in the building, which it is, having more glazing on the south side will increase solar gain, thereby increasing cooling loads during the summer and ultimately electrical bills as well. I hope this helps."
So Robin?
Yes.
I think it would be helpful, first of all, to send that to Marla, but also send to the Planning Commission. Because I think that's an important statement that you did, but it's also, I'm not sure what ability we have to waive that based on Efficiency Vermont's recommendations if it's written to the LDRs, but please do send that to Jessica or Mike Bittag at the Planning Commission as well.
We did send it to Marlis, so she does have it. We also read that the statute says should and not shall, and that you may allow the 22%. So we are requesting that.
Yeah, okay. Any board have a comment on having less glazing?
Yeah, Matt, I can speak to that in pretty detail. The 30% is a should, not a shall, and we as a board in past projects have sort of said it's guidance, not requirement. So if they're proposing 22%, there's, it's really nothing that says we have to do it. And we have had the discussion on at least one or two projects in specific about the fact that it flies in the face of energy efficiency and efficiency Vermont in terms of too many windows from a energy efficiency standpoint. Sometimes it's contradictory.
Okay.
Yeah, this is John. There's no window out there that's as efficient as a well insulated wall. So I completely agree with them. Thank you.
Okay. So it sounds like that's not an issue.
Totally makes sense to me.
This is
Yeah.
Marla. For the board's understanding, because this is something that comes up again and again, the standard isn't pertaining to the percent of glazing on the south-facing wall. And I'm not saying I want to change anything anybody just said, but just so the board understands. It pertains to the percent of the total glazing. So if a building has 10 windows, 3.5% of them should be on, or 3.5 of them should be on the south side, if all the windows are the same. It's not the percentage of the wall, it's the percentage of the total glazing on the building. So it's just a subtle difference. I think the board's discussion is still valid, but I just wanted to help everybody in.
Yeah, Marla, that makes for very odd looking buildings.
Sure does.
In the end, it doesn't really work.
Okay. With regard to building facades and the variations of the facades of the two buildings, staff recommends the board discuss whether they consider this criteria met, where building facades are encouraged to employ in a theme and a variation approach. Buildings should include common elements to appear unified, but facades should be varied from one building to the next to avoid monotony. Front porches, streets, and balconies that create semi-private space are oriented to the street are encouraged. These two buildings, the one in agenda item 8, agenda item 9, SB 2001, are essentially mirror images, are proposed to be mirror images. As noted above, they differ from multifamily buildings as constructed elsewhere in South Village by the number of doors. They also are located closer to the street than other multifamily buildings. Balconies are provided. So up for the board for discussion, looking at these two buildings, looking at SB 2020 and SB 2021, is there the variation that you think is required?
I have a question for the applicant. Is a false balcony the same as a Juliet balcony?
I think I probably call them French balconies. It is a false balcony on the plain sliding doors to the right and left of the center of the building. Those are what I would call a French balcony. I believe they also are called Juliet balconies.
Okay, thank you.
We have prepared a few comments about this. If the
Sure,
board would like to hear them.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Please, Robin.
All the historical comment from the DRB and staff regarding these buildings and all the multifamily have recommended to us that the multifamily buildings have the same facade when located side by side to have a harmonious interface with each other and the surrounding buildings. The unifying sameness is easier on the eye than if the massing of the two buildings were varied. Same color schemes are intended, and likewise, we have received historical input from the DRB and staff that this is preferable. The buildings have had multiple DRB and architectural reviews and approvals. The building themselves have varied planes. They're separated different finish materials. There's clapboard, there's shakes and stone that provide distinction in all these elements. There are the true balconies, and then the French style balconies with extensive glazing also provide architectural interest. These designs, when presented, originally received architectural review from then existing Architectural Review Committee, which was considered mandatory at that time. This style building was originally approved in the master plan, and they are different from the other 12-plex on site, which are 2-story walk-up townhouses. These buildings are designed to offer a needed type of unit not currently offered, which we've been trying to offer for a long time. They're garden style or flats. They're 4 flats to a floor. Each unit is a corner unit served by a central corridor and an elevator service, providing stairless access to the units on all floors. Due to these design features, we believe that the building facade criterion is met, similar to the past approval.
This is Dawn. What is stairless access?
It means you can use stairs to go up and down, but there's an elevator that takes you up and down. So if you're unable to use stairs or you don't want to use stairs, you don't have to.
Okay, but there are stairs for emergencies.
There are stairs by code. You have to have both.
Mark, John, Jim, Brian, Alyssa, any comments about the mirroring?
Matt, I don't recall, and maybe I'm trying to remember if I was actually on the board when that initial approval for South Village was actually approved, but I don't recall the language being requirement of harmonious. But for multifamily, it doesn't bother me. It's more when you get into single family and smaller structures that I'd rather see, like, you know, varying roof lines, colors, shapes, and all that. For multifamily, I'm okay with it being similar and having a harmonious feel to it. And I like the look of this design.
Okay, thank you for that, Mark. Any other comments?
I would say the same.
This is John. I've seen these buildings several times and I like them, so I'm fine with it.
Okay, thank you for that.
This is Brian. I think in this case, symmetry looks better than asymmetry would.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, moving on. Relationship to the proposed structures on site. Staff recommends the board discuss whether they consider this criterion met with regards to the site shall be planned to accomplish a desirable transition from structure to site, from structure to structure, to provide for adequate planting, safe pedestrian movement, and adequate parking areas. City planner reviewed the plans on May 4th and noted that the design of these buildings differs from other multifamily buildings in South Village. Instead of one entry per unit, they use a single entry. They note that this style doesn't seem to be as in keeping with South Village aesthetic as other multifamily buildings. Maybe, Robin, could you describe what is meant by or describe the one entry, single entry architecture?
Right. So this has a single entry on the first floor. That's a formal entry into that central column, which has essentially a lobby, an elevator, and then a common stairwell. But because they're flats on each floor, you can't have a front door for each unit on the first floor. So where the red dot is, that is the central doorway. And there is a very similar looking doorway on the back of the building, which goes out to the parking lot. The buildings are essentially the same front to back. That would be the Spear Street facing side.
And the other multifamilies in South Village, they differ how?
They're all walk-ups, so they all have they're all upstairs, downstairs units. So they all have the majority anyway have their own front door at ground level.
I see.
And there's 6 on a side, so you see 6 front doors on one side and 6 front doors on the other side.
Yeah.
So Dawn, I don't really have a stake in this, but I think the comment from the city planner was not that each unit must have an entry, but is there anything that precludes each of the ground floor units from having an entry?
The railings.
Yeah. If you had the if you had the entry here, it would also, I don't know.
It seems like it would be a very different architectural design, but Mark, I'll let you weigh in on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that it would have an odd feel to it. You know, this is a multifamily building that's designed to have a central front door with a common lobby, elevator, and you know, it's a style of sort of design, not the architecture, but the way the building functions. So I think it would be odd for those units to have their own separate front doors. And then you'd probably have to have a back door to the hallway, because that's probably where the mailroom is, you know, the trash and stuff like that, and access to the parking garage. So to me, I almost wouldn't want to see each of the ground floor units have their own front door and entrance.
Yeah, that's a good explanation. I'm with you, Mark. Okay. There's no other comments on 7. I'll move on to number 8, relationships of structures and site to adjoining area. Staff recommends the board require the applicant to provide a detail for this fence to allow the criterion to be evaluated. This is a retaining wall along the front space between the 2 proposed buildings to facilitate the entrance to the subsurface garage. The applicant has called out 42 feet of safety fencing for the top of this retaining wall, but staff has not been able to locate related detail. Can you provide that detail for us, Robin or David?
Yes, we did. We submitted Friday afternoon a detail. It's called the Fortress FE26. It's an iron railing. It's a black iron railing. It's very simple. 2 bands straight across. Style typically disappears to the eye, and it blends into the landscape. There's also significant landscaping in front of this railing. There are yews and cherry trees all along it, and the yews are spec'd at 30-inch size. The fence is 42, so within a year of those plants being planted, you're only going to see yews and you're not going to see a railing anymore.
All right, is that, Marla, did you get those?
I did. It sounds like I'm having a little trouble with the screen sharing and switching between the other to the pieces
Between
that.
documents, yeah, it freezes my screens when I try and go on multiple documents. So I can try it, but I can't promise anything.
Why don't I share mine really quickly? I think that might be the fastest way. You don't need to do anything. Can you see it?
Yep, we got it. Nice.
Thank
you. All right. I'm gonna give it back to you, Delilah.
Okay.
You might have to share a screen again. Hit the button again.
Okay, oops.
All right, and we're back.
Okay. All right, so that's the fence that's gonna go. You have that information, that level of detail. Number 9, staff recommends the board require the applicant to provide screening for the large existing transformer located to the rear of the building as viewed from the recreation path on lot 1. This is your electric utility transformer.
We have submitted a revised landscape plan that does landscape them with evergreens of a combination of yews and arborvitaes. We agree.
Okay, great, thanks. Regarding the landscape budgeting math, the 3%, 2%, 1%, is that, does the applicant see that math and agree with the math as presented by the staff?
We do agree, and we have revised and sent in a revised landscaping plan with a budget, and the landscaping plan includes that transformer. It also includes added arborvitae on the north boundary, the abutter to the north boundary. The Smiles family asked for those, so we were able to accommodate that, and then we were able to upsize the balance of the plantings.
Okay, great. Thank you, Robert. Item number 11, staff recommends the board require the applicant to address the comments of city stormwater section prior to closing the hearings. In particular, number 1, number 2, pro forma, number 3, grass channels are not identified as an acceptable practice for meeting the WQTS. Are the treatment ponds fully constructed at this time? Are they constructed to 2017 standards? The applicant has requested to provide further clarification regarding the previously permitted treatment practices. Is the grass channel installed? Please provide an updated hydrology plan. I'll just go through these one by one. So that first one.
I'm gonna defer to Dave on these.
Okay, David.
Here, Dave Marshall for the record. In this particular case, yes, we are in the Bartlett Brook watershed. As far as the project proposes to create more than 1/2 acre of impervious surface, this project is subject to an existing state stormwater permit. So not only do we have the benefit of that history as part of this being an infill of the phase 1 project, but also we have to also comply with the LDRs. I think in this particular case, we ask the board to recognize that the stormwater infrastructure that's in place today was designed to take the runoff from this particular lot, just as it was intended to do 10 years ago and 8 years ago. And in this particular case, there's no, the only thing that's necessary to basically control the stormwater from this particular site and get it to go where it was originally intended is to either install the swale that was originally designed, or basically create a modified swale, which is a berm that's above ground to basically corral the water and send it to the forebay of the stormwater ponds that were approved by the state. So right now, from Emily, we've gotten a number of comments as if this is a brand new project, and we understand that technically it is. But at the same time, we look for some understanding from the board with the fact that this is one of the last lots of phase 1 that is being developed. And we're looking to basically just continue on with the infrastructure that was approved both by the state and the city in support of the development on this particular lot 4 area. So some of these comments that you'll see later on are specific to what the current state stormwater rules require, but at the same time, it doesn't recognize that there's an existing stormwater permit that covers this particular project. We did share with staff the hydrology plan because that was easy. It was originally part of the master planned community. So at this point in time, that's kind of where we're coming from right now on the majority of these comments, that we believe that the historical nature of the development of phase 1, the original approvals of phase 1, the concepts associated with it, the supporting infrastructure, they are all in place. And all we're doing is basically trying to finish phase 1 with the last of the lots in this particular area.
Okay. So you said you have provided an updated hydrology plan. Number 4, the board included a condition, this is pretty standard, that regular maintenance of all stormwater treatment facility. I'm sure that's agreeable to you, David and Rob.
Yes.
Number 5, the applicant is asked to provide clarification on the elevation of the recreation path at the location of the discharge pipe. Will the path be impacted by the discharge of the pipe? Based on limited contour information and elevations, it appears that it will flood the path. So please take a look at that.
And yep. Oh, and that's, I apologize, Dave Marshall, for the record. That was my rambling about the swale. Right now, the recreation path was built at grade, similar to much of the other recreation paths in the city. However, the original design plans called for a swale to be installed on the uphill side of it so that any sheet runoff coming towards the recreation path, it would protect the path from any type of overflows. That still needs to be installed, and we recognize that. So that is going to be the means in which this particular path will be protected, is to implement the original design, or basically an offset or a similar method of basically protecting the swale.
Okay. And the applicant is requested to provide further detail regarding the outlet of possible parking garage drainage, sumps, and roof drainage.
That one's easy. There will be no drains in the garage.
Okay. Number 7, as the applicant completed a downstream analysis for the 25-year storm event, and according to 1203E 1203E3 of the city's land development regulations?
So in this particular case, because of the size of South Village, we're required to design for the 100-year storm event. So the ponds are basically oversized to basically manage those flows so that under post-development conditions that that everything's going to work or not adversely impact downgrading butters. In this particular case, the interconnect between the ponds is a 24-inch diameter pipe. We believe it easily can handle the 25-year storm. On the other side of the coin, the standard practice of the stormwater utility is not to ask applicants to replace existing infrastructure that's already in place. So in this particular case, we're going to try to just defer to that latter component without getting into complex analyses of as far as hydraulic capacity. But in this particular case, the 100-year storm event kind of speaks for itself as far as the ability to manage the flows through this particular area.
Right. Okay. Thank you for those comments.
Matt, so I would just jump in here to say that, as Robin mentioned, they did send over some responses to our stormwater section on Friday, but I think it's important that the board receive the feedback of the stormwater section before they close the meeting.
Yes, understood.
Matt, please ask people again to mute. There's a lot of ambient discussion.
And if we have to, Delilah can mute all and then bring us back online. But thank you for that reminder, Don. Please do mute if you're not talking. Okay, number 12, staff recommends the board discuss with the applicant why the curb cut on lot 4 does not appear to align with the proposed driveway. Can we take a look at that, Delilah?
And again, the way?
The curb cut on the parking circulation, curb cut on lot 4A does not appear to align with the proposed driveway.
Could I offer that it does pretty closely align with the exit driveway? It comes out there at Flanders. We did not install that. We inherited this project and it was installed there. The entry driveway curb cut is not yet installed, and obviously it would be installed once we go to build this building.
Lila, can you zoom way in on the northern curb cut?
Yeah. That one?
It's just, yeah, keep zooming. So I'm gonna draw on it here. There's sort of a little break between here, keep going, and here. And then again, there's a little break here and here, which seems very odd. Seems like the driveway should line up with itself. So that's what that comment is getting at.
So Dave Marshall here. We misunderstood that, Marlo. Obviously, I had the institutional history as in regards to where the original curb cuts were placed in the curbing itself, and as time has gone by between the original master plan concept and today, the driveway has shifted. But yeah, we understand what you're saying, and those should be smooth radii, and that should be a condition of approval that we fix that.
Okay. So you'll fix it on the plan.
We will fix it on the plan, and we have submitted a new drawing that answers the next question on the curb radius. So we have submitted a new plan with the 20-foot radius that Marla asked for.
Okay. Which we'll be able to see because we're going to continue this so we can have a chance to review it all. Okay, so then we're going to go to, that's it. That's it for this project. Now I'm going to, because we opened simultaneously, I'm going to go to 9.
Could I add one other note?
Yep.
The staff notes said that the lighting cut sheets were not provided, and I just wanted to make a note that they were provided on the L103 sheet. So we have not resubmitted that because they are in there.
Okay, I don't have that note. Maybe I'm looking on the wrong page.
I don't think that there was, it's just in the notes. It wasn't a call out.
Okay,
Okay, great. With regard to the building just to the, I guess we're to the south of us here.
Yes.
A lot of the questions have already been answered, but I want to just review staff comments, so make sure we've got coverage here. Again, number one, dealing with coverage. Same question as before. And I assume it's the same answer regarding 35%. Yep. Number two, since this project is required a master plan to obtain individual site plan approval, staff assumes no water allocation was obtained. You will get that as a condition of approval. And number three, staff recommends the board require the applicant to calculate how much translucent. We talked about that.
Yes.
That's fine. And then our landscaping math, which you are going to adjust for this project as you did for the other one, I assume, correct?
Yes.
Okay. We also opened up number 10, South Village Communities miscellaneous application. Have you read the draft decision regarding the miscellaneous application MS 2003, Robin?
We have read it and we accept it.
Okay. You have any questions about it?
No.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. Are there any other questions from the board regarding this?
Question.
Go ahead, Don.
This is John. So I read the comments that the neighbors and abutters submitted, and it sounded like they were surprised about the height of these buildings or the stories of these buildings. And I was thinking, well, maybe they're saying they wouldn't have bought their property if they thought the buildings were going to be this high. I don't understand it. So could you give me your interpretation of what their concerns are? And then I'd love to hear Marla's comments. Thank you.
Sure. We actually prepared a response to the Foster's letter. With your permission, I'll just read it. It's not terribly long.
Go ahead.
We are writing in response to the letter submitted by Brian Foster and the other signers. Skipping right to the key points, missiled by developers, traffic safety, and the 3-story height. We wanted to first of all acknowledge that we're grateful that they acknowledged that the 2 12-plex buildings were approved per the master plan. For the record, all plats recorded and proposed have always showed these 2 12-plex buildings at Aiken Street. The master plat labeled MP1 distributed to all homeowners with their common interest community documents at the time of their purchase and sale agreement engagement as required by Vermont statute. There should be no buyers not apprised of this intention unless they chose not to read those legal documents they receive when purchasing a home at South Village. We have consistently over the past decade or more shared the intentions of these 2 12-plex buildings in public hearings, and more recently in conjunction with the staff and DRB requested affordability plan. There was a brief slice of time when we explored the different concepts which never materialized. We were honest in sharing that that's what they were. Most recently, since fall and over the winter, and in 3 public hearings for the affordable plan, the 2 12-plexes were consistently represented on the plans and shared with residents. They've been viewed by many residents, as was evident by many residents who participated in those public hearings. None of those residents had any concerns about the 12-plexes. Many residents have communicated to us they acknowledge they were and remain a viable and accepted option and were good planning and the achieving of the affordable plan success. We have residents who have been waiting for these buildings to be built so they can move into a 1-level home and still live at South Village. Just regarding traffic, the South Village traffic approvals incorporate approvals for 344 units and 100-student school and the farm. With the recent approval of the affordable plan, the overall units were reduced to 321 and the 100-student school was eliminated, both greatly reducing traffic in the neighborhood. We maintain the traffic impacts are reduced by our recent applications and approvals, and this was validated in the recent traffic studies for the recent negation of the need for a left-hand turn lane on Despair Street from South Jefferson Road. Regarding height, the 3-story sign design has been shared since the project's onset. Am I going too fast?
No, but
No.
Robin, one of the things I should have said before I did this, and it's my fault, is I just want to acknowledge the receipt of a letter, which I have here, which I have read, which has been submitted to all the development review board members and it can be made public for any interested parties. That letter in concern to this project was from Brian Foster, Elaine and Bill Harwood, Louis and Rosa LaBoy Hernandez, Robert and Jane Perrin, Arnold and Brenda Feldman, Patricia Stokowski, Elaine Hezlet, Mike and Martha Smiles, and Mark Merrill. So I was in receipt of this letter, as was other DRB members, and I did read every word of it. So
Great.
that's the basis for John's question, which was leading to this response. I just wanted to, it's out of order, but felt it was important to say. Go ahead, Robin, continue.
Sure. We also received the letter. Regarding the height, the 3-story design has been shared since the project's onset and has previously received master plan approval, 2 separate DRB site plan approvals, and even an architectural design review board approval when there was one. And Mark was on the board then, because that's the first time I met Mark. The height allows us to build 12 units in each building, which enables us to meet the density requirements we have agreed to in the affordable plan and the overall requirement for South Village to produce 321 units of 295 market and 26 affordable. These buildings are designed in the South Village vernacular with a mix of clapper, shakes, and stone. We've already said all that. And will be sited with significant landscaping with oaks and evergreens softening the boundaries of the adjacent lots. The previous DRB and architectural reviews and approvals have also led to the buildings being complemented by blazing balconies and a variation of buildings, blah, blah. We believe the buildings not only will be visually pleasing, but will provide a long-awaited offering of the needed unit type, flat serviced by a central elevator, to provide a home for folks who need or prefer a home without stairs. This style of home has been in demand for years, and we're looking forward to filling the need in our community. Lastly, we want to acknowledge that the lots having been vacant and for the past many years is a big change in development, and it will be something different for people to used to. And they have likely become accustomed to seeing the vacant lots and understand they might not like the thought of them being developed, but it is with certainty that we shared that their development has always been on the plate and disclosed in all their common interest community documents, which they would have received when they purchased a home.
Okay, thank you, Robin.
Thank you for that. Marla, do you have any responses to that, or do any other board members? I'm trying to figure out how to integrate those comments into our review.
I'm happy to forward the letter.
Yeah, Robin, did you submit your response, your written response, as part of that supplemental package that you sent on Friday?
I did not. We only prepared that today, and I didn't think I could send you something today, but I can certainly send
it'd be great. I mean, you've read it now, so it'd be great if the board could have it so they could read it again at their leisure.
Sure.
And we are so before I ask the board for any other comments, or the staff for any comments, or the applicant if they have any questions, I will invite the public to comment. But I'll also say that we are going to continue this hearing because there's a couple of things that we need before this ends. And so this is not the last opportunity to comment if you've been listening. And there's always an opportunity to write in the chat box, to submit an email to Marla, and there'll be an additional opportunity to comment when this meeting is continued. But if there's nothing else on the board from the applicant or from the staff, I would invite anyone to either signify they wish to make a public comment by writing their name in the chat box, or by saying their name when I ask for names. Then I'll call people in order, give you 3 minutes. At the end of 3 minutes, you'll hear a little reminder to summarize your comments. So I have one person in the chat box that would like to speak by the name of Brian Foster. Hi, Brian. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Please say your name. Okay. So,
yes, Brenda Irons.
hi, Brenda.
Hi.
Okay. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Okay. So we're going to start with Brian Foster. Brian.
Hi. Thank you all for. Thank you, Robin, for your considerate response. And thank you, board, for acknowledging the letter that you received. I think that many of the issues have been addressed in Robin's response that she read. I think the one that remains outstanding was sandwiched in the middle regarding traffic, because this is an existing development that has already been mostly built out. there are some issues, I think, on a micro level, not just a macro level, that the board needs to consider. Robin, in her response, talked about the macro level issues of less density for the development and not the school and so forth. But in this particular configuration, this is a pretty widely used area by pedestrians. None of us are NIMBYs. We all acknowledge that it was going to be developed and welcome new neighbors. But it is an area that's widely used by pedestrians and also by a lot of children. And so the developers have not presented yet what their plans are for the two corner lots on 5 and 5A. If the board could focus on those and what the plans are with that, because those are both corner lots where cars could be coming in and out of duplexes and triplexes that have been proposed in the past, that could make a lot of complicated problems there for a neighborhood that's already built. Thank you.
May I comment?
Yes, is this Brenda?
This is Robin.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Those two lots, lot 5 and 5A, are single family.
Okay.
So there will be a single home on each one of the lots. There will not be any larger units.
Okay, thank you for that, Robin.
You're welcome.
Brenda Irons, would you like to make a comment?
Give her a second. I had to mute her, but I've unmuted her, so she's gonna have to unmute herself now. There was just a little bit of feedback.
Okay, Brenda, if you can hear me.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. Where is guest parking for these two buildings? It looks like if they're two-bedroom units, I mean, it's conceivable that most of these people will be probably have two cars. And so if you allot one parking space under the building for each unit, there are a few left over. But where is the parking? Are guests, if they have a party, supposed to park on Aiken Street, which is not a really wide street? And that too has to do with traffic.
Okay, thank you.
Am I loud and clear?
Yeah, no, I've got it. Thank you for
Okay.
that question, Brenda. It's a good question. Robin, do you have a comment to that question about parking and availability of parking for these people that are visiting and live here?
Yes, and that site plan that's available on the screen right now, you can see that there's underground parking for, I believe, almost every unit has 2 parking spaces in the garages. I believe that there are 2 units that will have 2 spaces outside. But all the way around the perimeter of that driveway, which is one way, there's parallel parking all alongside it. If we zoom in.
Okay, all right, I see that. Okay, that helps because we certainly don't want street parking, which there's already some issues about street parking in the community. So if I don't know how many spaces there are, I do see the little division lines, but it's something. So, okay.
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you, Robin, for that response. If there's not, is there any other questions or comments? And I would move. Well, we've got a couple decisions to make. One is we've got item number 10, which is miscellaneous application MS 2003. Which we can close, and then item 8 and 9, which will continue to June 16th. Is that right, Marla? Do I have that correct?
Right. So similar to what we saw for O'Brien, this may be one of those situations where the board may want to just keep MS 2003 open until such time as the 2 Aiken Street applications are closed, because you don't want South Village to have to undo the miscellaneous if these 2 don't go forward. Though the ready to go if you wanted to go that way.
Fine with you, Robin?
Yes.
Okay, so I move that we continue site plan application SB 2020, site plan application SB 2021, miscellaneous application MS 2003, to continue all three till June 16th. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Don. Okay, roll call. Brian Sullivan,
Aye.
Don Philibert,
Aye.
Jim Langdon,
Aye.
John Wilking. John Wilking. Alyssa Portman,
Aye.
Mark Bear,
Aye.
John Wilking. Matt Coda, the chair, votes aye. So we've got 6, 0, and 1. We're 6. Measure passes. That all three items are continued to June 16th. Thank you very much, Robin, Patrick, David.
Thank you for your time.
Yep. And we are now going to move to item number 11 on the agenda, which is sketch plan application SD 2014 of Jennifer and Robert Morway for a planned unit development on an existing 15-acre lot developed with a single-family home and barn. The planned unit development is to consist of 8 single-family homes and 1 existing single-family home at 1751 Heinsberg Road. Who is here for the applicant?
Dave Marshall from Civil Engineering Associates.
Hi, Dave. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Anyone else with you?
We will have Jennifer Morway that will be monitoring our discussions tonight.
Okay, it's sketch plan, so we don't need to swear you or anyone else in. Just want to remind the public that this is sketch, and sketch plan is a high-level review and discussion where an applicant receives feedback from the board on major elements of the project before it is fully designed. During this meeting, the board may provide oral guidance to the applicant, which constitutes the board's determination that the application meets the purposes of the land development regulations, but these comments are to help guide the applicant to a later application that meets the full LDR requirements and contributes to the goals of the comprehensive plan. This is not a formal hearing. There will be no vote. It does not result in a binding decision. There's no swearing in. The board may choose to continue the hearing at a later date if there are questions that remain to be examined, and a future date will be announced prior to concluding this item. Upon conclusion of the sketch plan meeting, an applicant who wishes to move forward with their project will have to submit a complete application, and the next level of review includes additional public notices and a formal public hearing. Okay, so sketch plan. Tell us a little bit about what's proposed here, David. Mr. Marshall?
Sorry, muted.
There you go.
Again, for the record, Dave Marshall from Civil Engineering Associates. Marla or Delilah, I didn't know if you could bring up sheet C 1.0 or 1.1. That represents an existing condition plan that will help all of us orient ourselves with regard to what the existing 15-acre property looks like and its location. And out of all that, we can then work through the staff notes in support of that.
I'm working on it. Hold on a second. This plan. Marla, is B the plan? I have 2 items open and they're both this draft.
11B. Why don't you go into the regular one, just 11 in the regular packet?
Oh, sorry.
And I think that would be. Are you? Yeah, you're in the right.
No, I brought up the wrong. Sorry.
And it looks like you've paused your sharing because we're still looking at the minutes.
Yeah.
Just do that.
Let me just bring up what I have because. Okay.
Oh, while we're waiting for that, is there any other disclosures from the board regarding this project? I just want to disclose that I live nearby. I paid a site visit to take a look at the property. I just want to let the applicant know that and the abutters.
Okay.
So what you have up on screen, at least on the right-hand side, is the plat plan that was recently approved by the city. It represented a subdivision plan, otherwise controlled by capital. The staff reports on the left-hand side of the viewing monitor tonight. And in this particular case, what you will see on the staff report on the very top are view protection areas, view protection zones that either are adjacent to the site looking easterly from Heinsberg Road or encompass a small portion of the northeasterly portion of the property. So at this point, anytime you can find the plans, we'll continue to kind of narrate this through for you.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's going a little further. I think if we can basically take a step back to C 2.0. What we're looking for is the existing condition plan, and to orient you, north is straight up on this particular sheet, and on the right-hand side is Heinsberg Road. What you see at the very top of the sheet is the driveway for Mr. Nato's house, and that is also subsequently the same location of the future street associated with cider mill called Nato Crest Drive. And with that being the background, things that are of interest with regard to natural resources on the property is the documentation that we took from the comprehensive plan. There are no streams, there's no map wetlands, but there are some steep slopes. The only things that do show up on the comprehensive plan are basically the steep slopes on the left quarter of the site. You can see the darker lines. Those are the contours that are close together. That represents a steep section of the property. And also on the right-hand side, kind of right in the middle, there's a gently sloping area, but then as you move towards the right or the east towards Heinsberg Road, you have another steep transition down to the road. So when you look at the comprehensive plans, and we included these in the application package, you'll see those areas shaded out. So those represented what within the land development regulations said that we should be designing around with this particular project. So that being the background, what we planned on doing was utilizing the future installation of Nato Crest Drive as being our intersection for this particular project. So we would actually come in from the north at the very top of this drawing and head in the southerly direction along that open area that's between the steep on the right and the very steep on the left. So maybe this is a good time to shoot to the next drawing and we can show the concept of with regard to the roadway alignment that would again take us from the future Nato Crest Drive southerly through the project site. There we go. So here what we've done is again created an intersection that's farther from the Heinsberg Road intersection of Nato Crest Drive and the state highway. So again, I'm starting at the very top right of this particular property. And as we come left along Mr. Nato's driveway, which ultimately is going to be Nato Crest Drive at some point in the future, we propose a new intersection that then heads in the south and southwesterly direction. It is a curved road trying to work with the contour of the land. At the same time, we are creating a vertical profile that complies with land development regulations. So we actually come up to a high point and then we come back down at the southerly end. Things that we recognize now that we should have done earlier perhaps was adopt the requirements that the roadway be extended to the south property line to enable future extensions of this particular roadway. I will get into that in more detail with, that's one of the staff comments that the board was asked to discuss. So that being the background, other than perhaps zooming in a little bit on this, we are proposing 8 new lots. They are not your traditional 50-foot wide lots. They do meet the minimum standards. There is no maximum requirement in regards to frontage. We've tried to basically bring the buildings close to the street on all but one particular situation where there are recommended standards, but not mandatory standards in regards to the proximity of the buildings to the roadways themselves. With the understanding that this is kind of a transitional area of the city as we move from the very open area of the farm northerly into the areas that subsequently are being developed at a higher and higher level. So what we tried to do is not pile this up with a lot of lots, but basically create something that tried to work with landform more than, again, lots that perhaps would mimic what is immediately down to the bottom left, which is, again, the cider mill project, where those particular buildings have been maximized in regards to their particular layout. So that's at least the big picture, again, of what we were trying to work around. In this particular case, relative to the open space that's proposed, we're looking at encumbering the lands both on the west side as well as the east and south ends of the property with a conservation easement that would basically encumber the lands from any further development. We would obviously look for some of these open spaces to be managed in a manner that allows for people to enjoy them as much as possible. Integrated into the very middle of the site is a pedestrian path. It's not a traditional recreation path. The topography is challenging in this particular regard, but we did want to basically break up the block in a way that introduced the ability for looped walking components in addition to the sidewalk that's associated with the roadway corridor. So that's kind of the project in a very brief overview. And I think we'll be looking into additional details based on the staff comments.
Yeah, Dave, before we start on the staff comments, as I read the commentary, it's 15 acres, 1.2 base density. The LDRs want you to suggest that you can put 18 units on this property, and you could go up to 60 with the TDRs, but you decided on, or your client decided on 8 + 1 for 9. Is there a background or a reason for that?
Two reasons. One, they want to load this up with excessive density. They just didn't feel that was appropriate for their particular experience with the property. At the same time, 9 lots basically also keeps you under Act 250 in regards to additional jurisdictions.
Well, that was my question. Because it's connected to the rest of the Eau Claire property, would it be exempt from a 250? I don't know the answer to that, but I just I flagged that as thinking perhaps it wouldn't be exempt because of the connection to the other property. I don't know. I'm not an Act 250.
We will obviously seek jurisdictional opinion, but this is a standalone lot that is being developed in a manner that creates less than 10 lots. So our experience is that basically keeps you underneath the wire.
Okay. The boards, any people on the board members have comments before I go into the staff comments? Okay, hearing none. Comment number 1. In aggregate, staff considers the proposed configuration detracts rather than enhances the goals of the SEQ and recommends the board discuss with the applicant the need to revise the proposed subdivision so that the goals are better supported. Those goals include requirements 906B3 for the development of the SEQ, which urges preserving of the existing natural resources, including but not limited to primary natural communities, streams, wetlands, floodplains, conservation areas shown in the comprehensive plan, special or natural or geologic features such as mature forest, headwaters areas, and prominent ridges. Staff considers the standard applies to the central ridge feature of the site, of which the applicant is proposing significant regrading to accommodate the proposed homes. 907 describes the intention of the street block and lot criteria to provide pedestrian scale developments, patterns that allow direct and efficient walking and bicycle trips and decrease circuitous vehicle trips. This is a unique piece of property. There's no question about it. It's a beautiful piece of property. And it's a sort of a standard 8-unit subdivision, but the board taking a look at this, you have any comments regarding what the staff was concerned about? John? Mark, Brian? Melissa?
Could we hear more from the staff about why they made that comment?
Sure.
Sure.
There's a lot in there about, the SEQ being formed to encourage open space preservation and well-planned residential use. The development is intended to be in clusters. This is obviously a prominent ridgeline. And as Dave alluded to, the project should sort of work with the ridgeline and preserving those valuable open spaces. I didn't quite make it into the staff comments, which Paul asked me to bring up tonight, is that a lot of the SEQ standards are related to design, but another factor that isn't explicit in the LDRs but does matter is denser development results in a lower amount of infrastructure per unit. And there are some requirements that roadways serving greater than 5 units be public. This would be a public road with approximately twice the length per unit as other developments like Cider Mill or South Village or Rye that are nearby. So if there were some way that this be a private road, the homeowners would have to accept the burden of that, effectively double the regular maintenance costs. And if it were a public road, then the city would have to accept that double the maintenance cost of normal development.
But this can't be a private road because of the number of homes on it. Is that correct, Marlo? So
Under today's LDR, it cannot. This project's in an interesting place because there are some upcoming changes to the PUD regulations. Those are anticipated to be fairly significant, and this project is not vested until it submits preliminary plat. So I think that the upcoming PUD regulations, and I'm pretending to be Kathy Ann right now, the upcoming PUD regulations would have some significant advantages from this project, so the applicant may want to think about, whether they want to postpone a little bit and explore what the upcoming changes are and think about being under those LDRs, or if they want to stay under the LDRs that are today, then obviously it's a known thing and continue moving forward. But it's not a very long wait, so I would encourage them to think about at least looking into what the changes are going to be.
So you're suggesting the new PUD standards, which are being promulgated, would allow a private road with 8 lots?
It may, yeah. Right. And there's some different requirements pertaining to elements that are required, so open spaces and things, but it may have the advantage for this project that it would be allowed to be a private road, but it would have some other constraints placed on it.
Would it require the road to be connected to the adjoining property?
I don't know. I'm not involved in the day-to-day. Delilah, do you recall the answer to that question?
No, I'm sorry, I do not either.
Okay. Mark, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, this is a kind of a tough one because you're right. It is a really unique parcel, and you sort of say, okay, when developers come in who've maxed out the development density on a site, we typically start playing the pushing and molding and all that, and tweak it down to get some pocket areas open and things like that, and play that game. Here, the applicant has come in and sort of proposed almost like a minimal amount of development for a 15-acre lot. Some of those constraints are rationale in that it's got some steep slopes on it, but that said, it doesn't fall under what we traditionally sort of want to see in terms of cluster development. But at the same time, I'm not sure how you kind of force a homeowner into doing that when they're kind of doing what we've heard everyone screaming about in the past with higher density in this area. I would be nervous about the private road if it doesn't have to connect to the lot to the south, because obviously there's a lot of development going in around here, and these are starting to become infill development sites. And I really would not want to see it become a standalone sort of dead end road. If it's going to go in, I think it should go in with future connections to other developments in the area.
I would encourage you to think about density not in terms of total units on 15 acres. Or not, I'm sorry, I would encourage you to think about it as total units on 15 acres being 9. That's low density, that's fine. But this is bisected density, you know, where it's 1 lot per every acre and a half. So instead of having contiguous open spaces, you have really disconnected open spaces with that traditional suburban feel that everything in the SEQ is designed to avoid.
I would agree with you with that, Marla. You know, yeah, all the open space is private, and it doesn't lend itself to, I guess, neighborhood interconnectivity that we look at when we get like a lot larger developments where you have the opportunity to get, you know, bisecting open space parcels. Here it's just, you know, 1 to 1.5 acre lots, and every one of them, there's going to be no ability for open space pathways, connectivity, things like that. So I see the dichotomy and the conflict we have on this development.
Hey, it's John. I hear you, Marla, but boy, looking at the rocky roadside, just the contours of this map, I don't see it being high density. I think they've probably done the right thing personally. I know it's not in compliance with what we asked for, but I frankly think other than sort of dead ending lot 6 with you know, a cul-de-sac, well, it's not a cul-de-sac, but a hammerhead, and not giving it the opportunity for continuation. I have a problem with that too. But other than that, I see no problem with this.
Anyone else on the board would like to comment?
Well, could you zoom in a whole bunch to maybe like the top half, NATO Crest Drive, lot 9, lot 8, lot 1, and lot 2? So you can kind of see the shaded area on lot 9 is pretty flat, where the area where all the homes are is got a lot of relief to it. I don't know the exact scale, but the lot size in the SEQ is relatively, minimum lot size in the SEQ is relatively small. It may be possible to get 8 homes just in that flat area.
In lot 9, is that what you're saying?
Right, so I mean, so in lot 8 and lot 9, there's sort of a light colored shaded area that's all pretty flat.
Yeah, but that's on the other side of the hill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's in the lowlands leading up to Mr. NATO's property. I can see where you're coming from, but certainly the house site wouldn't lend to multifamily.
No.
No, and I'm not suggesting multifamily. But the minimum lot size is 1,200 square feet, which is, you know, a quarter acre. If lot 9 is an acre or 2 acres, you could almost get all of your development into just lot 8 and lot 9.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that.
That hill is problematic. you've got what you'd have lots, you'd have the home. I mean, this is a pretty steep hill. I confess I climbed it, and it'd almost be like two separate neighborhoods. And one would be in right over here, right up against this line, and the other would have the premium views on this side.
Why are there two development? Why are there two neighborhoods, Matt?
Well, I just mean, I mean, this is a significant rise here. It would just be, I feel like they would be disconnected if you were on one on the western side of that hill and one on the eastern side.
Why would there be one on the eastern side?
Well, right where I assume you'd put it over here to the left of lot 9 and then to the right of that road. Is that what you're referring to?
No, just all to the left of the road.
Oh, and nothing on where lot
So
1.
scrap all of the layout that's shown here mentally. And I would almost fit 9 homes or 8 homes west of the road.
Okay, but why would you do that?
Yeah, I'm not sure why I wouldn't do that if I were.
If I was them, I wouldn't do that. Yeah.
To preserve the ridge.
2 and 3 is where I mean, those would be probably I mean, it's still flat there until that area. Well, we could design the lots and lines, but there's some other significant blank spots and question marks that need to be addressed. So let's put a pin in that right now. 2 is staff recommends the board advise the applicant that they'll need to demonstrate compliance with residential design standard as part of any applicant involving the proposed number of units. David, you back still there? Dave Marshall?
I am still here.
Okay. You understand that criteria?
Well, I'd like to kind of have that discussed or at least brought out in a little bit more detail in regards to exactly what we're looking at. You know, my standard request is that we don't show the single family homes until there's actually ready to build them as part of a zoning permit. And the other side of the coin is that we are looking at trying to adopt as many of the Southeast Quadrant goals as possible. Many of them are goals and not mandatory. We've tried to basically balance, those goals with what this particular site kind of affords. And in this particular case, we've identified specific building envelopes and where these particular homes would be proposed to be placed to try to, again, control their relationship to the roadway. Just going back to one of Mark's comments as far as, pedestrian component, you're always going to have the sidewalk along the roadway. That's a mandatory requirement. But again, in the mid-block area, we have this loop system of walking trails that are intended to, again, allow people to get out and enjoy some of that open space that's around them. Keeping in mind that, again, when it came to the natural resources of this area, the comprehensive plan basically identified the steep area on the left and the steep area on the right as being areas that should be kept off guard, basically not developed. And that makes sense, especially on extremely steep slopes. So that's not an issue with the applicant. Things that, as I look at this now, you can kind of see this milky colored overlay on the left side or west side of these lots. We could probably take that even further up the hill to fully include the steepest portions of this particular area, again, as a commitment to recognizing that the comprehensive plan called for those particular areas to be protected, but it didn't say anything about in between the two. So what we've done is basically placed and aligned the roadway and the lots adjacent to it in a manner that basically kept out of those identified resource areas. And this is the product that came forward. So yes, we could do 18 units in this particular case and make this look a lot different. But at this point, the applicant just wasn't interested in going in that particular direction. They had a personal connection to the property for a long period of time, and this was really what they felt was the most appropriate for the character of the area.
Right. No, but I think to get to the question of the staff, Dave, I mean, this is neither feast nor fowl here. It's not a subdivision, it's a PUD. But it's not a PUD unless we have some, we have some idea of how these lots are going to be developed. I mean, do I have that about right, Marla?
Yes.
So we have some more idea of what it's going to look like. We're not just approving a subdivision with lots. We're approving a PUD. Presumably.
So I guess the
direction we're going.
part-
We're not.
I'm sorry, Matt, my fault. Well, I guess what I'm trying to understand is if we were to commit, to what is shown on the plan right now, what additional information would be required of the applicant in order to demonstrate how the planned unit development would be ultimately seen as far as its developed nature?
Well, I mean, there's an example here in the quote, residential buildings must be oriented to the street and have a close relationship between the building and the street. Buildings must be related harmoniously to one another and to the site. I mean, we're going to need to see more information on what can be built there and how it will be built as a PUD rather than a subdivision, simple 2-lot subdivision. Which includes all the residential design standards in the LDRs, although that will presumably change with the new PUD requirements. Marla?
Yeah. Yes.
And I'll be honest, I don't know what those are. I mean, Paul could give us a summary. But he's not here right now.
So yeah, I think what you pointed out, C, building orientation, facades, front building setbacks, placement of garages and parking. These are all, what makes a PUD. And then there will be sort of an equivalent set of standards in the upcoming regulations if this project is applied for after those are effective.
And here's a dumb question. It needs to be a PUD because of the road, right? Why does it need to be a PUD?
It needs to be a PUD because all developments in the SEQ are required to be PUDs specifically because there's the goal of creating these residential designs.
But if this was one lot that was subdivided, it would need to be a PUD.
It would. All subdivisions in the SEQ are required to be PUDs for the purpose. I had to dig into the archives to figure this out, but the reason all subdivisions in the SEQ are required to be PUDs is because of the design constraints that are to be placed on them. So it's a bit of a tautology.
Okay, and then just for clarification purposes, this area of the SEQ, this is not included in the interim zoning, is that correct?
Correct.
Meaning the city council didn't have to do a thumbs up or thumbs down before this could proceed to the DRB?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Any other comments on the board?
Yeah, Mark here. One thing I do want to comment on is the that proposed pedestrian trail loop. One of my concerns would be that, because it meanders in and out of the private lots, on and off the individual private lots, is that there's some sort of control or easements put for it so that, if someone's walking on it, you're not like feeling like you're walking through someone's backyard. And that's something we typically do ask for and we discuss with PUDs. I'm especially looking at, obviously the, lot 3, between lot 3 and 4, and obviously between lot 7 and 8, where it's sort of because of the nature of the topography, it has to do switchbacks back and forth. And, now you're on someone's private land and, I would be worried people would be reticent to use it if it was feeling like you're walking through someone's backyard.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Good comment. Staff comment number 3, staff considers that the ultimate development layout warrants a roadway through the middle of the parcel. It may be possible to satisfy the connectivity requirements by connecting the south end of the roadway back to Heinsberg Road at the existing curb cut, but not by connecting to the adjacent parcel to the south. Recommends the board advise the applicant to consider such an alternative once a layout satisfying the purpose of the SEQ has been achieved. So a lot of open-ended questions there for you, Dave, and the applicant, your client, which is, do you connect it to the south property in anticipation of an eventual connection? Should that be developed? Do you connect it back to the roadway? Does it remain a private road under presumably new PUD standards that allow such private roads to exist, or is it a public road? So these are some of these questions that we don't know the answers to at this time, unless you do. Dave? Dave, are you on mute, Dave? Or do we lose you? Mr. Marshall? Hello?
It says his web connection is off, but it looks like his phone connection is still on.
Well, we may have to continue this hearing. Dave, we'll give you another few minutes.
I'm going to fill the blank space a little bit. So the, Delilah, can you go back to the one that's a little more zoomed out? Yeah, that one's perfect. So you can kind of see, I'm going to draw on it. You can kind of see that this road, and you can't see where they propose to extend it, but if they were to extend it down this a ways, it kind of goes into this parcel down to the south and then doesn't have a game plan. So that parcel to the south is owned by Dirt Capital Partnership or Dirt Capital something. And then, so it could potentially go out to Cider Mill, but obviously those are all house lots, or it could go down to Heinsberg Road. So I think the staff comment here was in order to meet the connectivity intention that it should be aimed towards Heinsberg Road, and maybe it should be aimed towards Heinsberg Road, earlier rather than farther down. But it just sort of passed the sniff test that this is a viable connection, not just a road that will dead end to another development that may or may not happen.
So Marla, this is John.
Dave Mark.
On the south part of that, there's a kind of an abandoned farm with a stable or barn, whatever you call it, one on the north, one on the south. Do we know, are those going to be demolished? Do we know what the fate of those are?
We know a little bit about that parcel. So that parcel is intended to be at least partially conserved. The owners of that parcel, Dirt Capital, is sort of a holding company that helps provide interim funding for property owners who wish to conserve their lands. They requested city contribution to that conservation, and I believe the city council has decided that they will be working towards conservation of that parcel from the south to the north. So if we think about this parcel, it's very, very large. It goes all the way down to Cheese Factory Road. About that parcel holistically, the northern portion is the part that's least likely to be conserved, but it is still at least targeting conservation at this time.
But you're talking about conservation of the land, not the buildings.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So,
and Dave, go ahead. I was just sort of filling the void while we lost you.
Dave, I don't know how much you heard of my question, but we were talking about the different the known unknowns here. Is whether the road dead ends and remains private under presumably some new PUD standard, whether it becomes a public road, whether the connections on Heinsberg Road, or whether it is to the adjacent lot. I don't know if you can answer any of those known unknowns at this time. Oh, did I lose him again?
Yeah, I apologize for the technical difficulties, but I trust you can hear me.
Yep. Could you hear my question, Dave?
Okay. So in this particular case, what we would like to bring. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So in this particular case, we're concerned with the thought of trying to bring the roadway back down to Heinsberg Road. The Agency of Transportation will not allow for that to occur based on their access policy. And what we would really recommend is that we extend the roadway to the south property line. We've done work for that particular property owner and their ideas of how to develop that particular property. And one of the things that was precluding them was the challenges of just gaining access to certain portions. And this particular project would actually facilitate some of their future plans. So just like any time you extend a roadway to the end of the property, there's no guarantee that anything is going to happen. But the important thing is that we don't preclude it from happening. And in this particular case, changing the roadway design to extend to the south property line, I think is the best way to basically both achieve the compliance requirements of the land development regulations, but also enable the adjacent property owner to perhaps take advantage of this particular infrastructure and
so
the amount of that they would have to put into place otherwise.
Okay, thank you, Dave. I'm not sure we have, my computer was breaking up a little bit, so I didn't hear all of that. I don't know if everyone else did, but let's put a pin in that for right now. Number 4, we talked about access, or we are talking about access now. A couple of things. This is also a further comment regarding wastewater and sewer. A lot is dependent here on Cider Mill 2 being built, both for access on Nato Crest Drive, which would become a public road, and for sewer. So this is done in anticipation that it will occur after Cider Mill 2 happens, but Cider Mill 2 hasn't pulled a permit yet, and possibly could not happen. So is indeed, Dave, this contingent upon Cider Mill 2, both for wastewater and for access, road access, or not?
Definitely for wastewater, and access. We'll rely upon that for now. And there's still the opportunity to build that short section from Heinsberg Road into this particular site, provided that the easements could be acquired. But there's no guarantee there. But otherwise, I think the safe answer is that it does rely upon the cider mill infrastructure.
Right. And we, as of now, we don't have any knowledge of them asking for permit to build that road. And then, of course, this is you'd have to have your own well water, because our city water doesn't support sending water to that elevation. So all these lots would have to be able to prove that they can have can be served by well water. Is that correct?
Yes, we're very comfortable being that. That is correct. We're very comfortable being able to demonstrate that to you.
Okay. So it's an odd juxtaposition, seeing this project and anticipating that some of its needs will be met by development that has been approved, but not under construction. But that's the way the process works, I guess. The one comment that I haven't gotten to, I think I skipped. I talked about water, talked about the road, which is the concern from staff about a consolidated development pattern. Under the SEQ standards, 908A establishes block lengths of 300 to 500 feet, and as noted above, contemplates 20 lots 50-foot frontage in a typical neighborhood design. This applicant is proposing 850 feet of roadway infrastructure to support 8 housing lots, or 200 per lot. That was discussed in a different forum before, but yeah, the challenge is, as a PUD and the SEQ is determining whether or not it complies with these requirements.
So if I may jump in.
Go ahead, Dave.
Oh, I'm sorry. All I was getting at is that what we need to work on with regard to the orientation of buildings to the street. You know, as it is laid out right now, each one of them talks to the street, but it's also at a distance that's slightly greater than what the preferred, it's not a required number, but the preferred number is as far as the street and the building communicating with the street. There is one particular lot that doesn't meet that particular standard. So it is what it is in regards to what's shown today. But the other things to keep in mind is that, you know, there are no specific maximum lot width limitations in the southeast quadrant. So there are specific goals, but we also can't be inventing new ones in regards to how this particular works. There are opportunities for increased density, but there's also not a minimum density. So I just want us to all recognize that there is a balancing act here in regards to what the goals are. And again, there are certain components of the land development regulations to talk about shall versus should, or maybe, or it's recommended. So keeping in mind that we're trying to keep with the spirit, but maybe not exactly with the full compliance, is a component of the characteristics of this particular site.
Okay. Is there any other questions from staff or the board for the applicant before I ask the public for comments?
Matt, if I could just remind the board, so planned unit developments are intended for the board to have the authority to modify the land development regulations to meet the goals and to allow innovation and infill development. So the board within a planned unit development has full authority to require things that would otherwise outside of a PUD be guidelines.
Right. Okay. Is there anyone in the public that would like to comment on this proposed, on this sketch plan? Go ahead and say your name if you'd like to comment. Okay, hearing none. You know, so we've got some unanswered questions here regarding the roadway about the PUD. Well, Mike, Dave might have addressed a part of that, but we can ask that you come back with another sketch, or continue the sketch, or is there something the board needs to hear more before we end this hearing? So maybe it's appropriate to, Marla, to continue this till June 16th?
You know, I would like to hear whether the board is inclined. I mean, the purpose of sketch is to provide feedback on the project. To hear from members what their feedback is.
Well, you know, John offered his comments regarding the size of the lots and the distance. I tend to agree with that. I'm not quite sure how we're going to address the road. Have we determined that tying it into the curb cut on 116 is not going to work? Have we determined whether this is going to be a public roadway or a private roadway? That might change my thoughts about the distance between the lots. to me, there's still things to be resolved here. That's why I'm suggesting a continuation.
Yeah, one other thought. I was this is John. I was looking at Google Earth, and clearly the access onto the top of the hill at this point comes through that lot 5, the farm, and up the hill. You know, this could be a looped road, but I assume they don't want to do that for some reason. Just another thought. I mean, I have no problem with this concept at all, personally. I think looking at the contours, it makes sense.
And Matt, Mark here.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, you know, I mean, one thing I'm hearing Marla's comments, and some of the things that did sort of stick out to me is, you know, if we have always talked about block length, and we've discussed it kind of at length when it comes to PUDs. And we are talking about, you know, about an 850 to 900 foot long road, whether it's public or private. Right now it dead ends. We're talking about potentially trying to connect it back to Heinsberg Road. You know, lot 5, which is, you know, the existing house on this parcel, you know, it is part of the PUD, you know, and, you know, they might not want it to connect back, but, you know, if that's the only logical way of actually doing a connection to, you know, Heinsberg Road, it might have to be something that they're going to have to take a hard look at, because John was right. It is kind of the only way to access up onto the hillside, and it currently exists as just a path or a trail. But the one thing that I kind of did stick out to me from what Marla was saying was, you know, we have an 850 foot long road that is servicing 8 houses. You know, if that becomes a public road, you know, we're taking on as the citizens and taxpayers maintaining an 850 foot long road with 8 new, you know, new taxpayers, and that certainly isn't going to pay for that. And I guess that is kind of where the density for road length and infrastructure comes from, you know. And if we did do cluster development, you wouldn't have nearly as much road for the number of units. So that is definitely something to keep in mind as we look at this parcel moving forward, that while we might look at it and say it makes sense for the topography, it might not make sense from the standpoint of a PUD.
Okay. Any other comments on the board?
Just one quick one. I think we were all having some difficulty hearing Dave when he was speaking.
Yes.
And I think that alone is reason to continue this. I think when we're under the restrictions that we are now, and someone is trying to communicate and succeeding 100% of the time, we should take the time necessary to make sure their message gets heard.
I would agree with Brian. It was very broken up. I think that makes it hard for the applicant and Dave.
All right, well, we know from the applicant that they agree with us regarding the road, and they're gonna, I'm gonna assume Dave's gonna put his head together with the applicant and find out more. So I suggest we continue this hearing. I suggest we continue SD 2014 for June 16th.
Second.
Seconded by Don. Roll call, Brian Sullivan.
Aye.
Don Philibert.
Aye.
Jim Langdon.
Aye.
John Wilking.
Aye.
Melissa Portman.
Aye.
Mark Bear.
Aye.
And Matt Cotto votes aye. We'll hopefully see something new and discuss this further with the applicant on June 16th. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll now move to item number 12 on the agenda, continued sketch plan application SD 2015 of Don Stewart to amend a previously approved plan for an airport complex. The amendment consists of constructing a 17,200 square foot two-story addition to an existing 39,200 square foot one-story existing hangar office building, reconfiguring the adjacent parking area and related to site improvements at 1150 Airport Drive. Who is here for the applicant?
Don Stewart is here for the applicant,
Hey.
along with
Hey, Don.
two of the applicants who are Blaine Newton and Kyle Clark. The architects, Joel Page and Gregor Maysfield, our landscape engineer, Chris Gendron from Stantec, and Carolyn Orban, our landscape architect from Wagner Hodgson.
Okay.
Don, let me get Larry Lackey here too for the property owner.
Hey, Larry. Okay, I think, I can't remember if you were all present at the last meeting, so so thank you for coming back. If you were present, this is a sketch plan application. We asked to continue it to discuss in specific the parking. You have created some, maybe we can switch the screen, Delilah. You've created some alternative looks at parking for this development. Can you describe that further, Don, if you want to take the lead?
Okay, Matt, that'd be great. Delilah, could we please pull up the C102 drawing that's in the packet? It's the existing, the existing layout of the site. And it's in this packet, not in what I added today. Before we completely leave, thank you. And if we could enlarge that, that would be great. No, this is SK1. So if you go down a little further, you will get to, there we go. That's the existing. Enlarge that for a moment. I wanted to take a moment and bring back to the board's thought process why we came up with a very specific and unique design for the parking lot. The existing parking lot as it is, there are currently 7 parking spaces in this area, and we are bound and determined, 85 parking spaces, and we were bound and determined to try to figure out a really unique and interesting way to present the front of this building. So I just wanted you to take a second and look at, this is the existing situation. There are 85 parking spaces in the front of the building, that either in front of the building, along the southwest side, or directly along the south of the building. And there are 39 spaces in front of the building, and there are 19 spaces that sit in the setback in front of the building. So those are some numbers just to keep in mind that we will come back to in a moment. Delilah, if you could go to the secondary attachment that I sent today, and the very first piece of information in there is the submission that we made 2 weeks ago that showed it was a color submission of, and it showed the curved parking. And I just wanted to go back to this for a second before we leave it completely and talk about these other alternates.
Marla, is that in supplemental? Because I'm in pieces and I have these two things.
Yep, you want to be in supplemental. And I've compiled it all of the 5 pages that Dawn sent today into one PDF.
If you keep going, there'll be a color one. Maybe the next, there we go. This is what we submitted last week. And this showed a lovely demonstration of a curved approach to that both the north and the south access to the Beta building, and I think a demonstratively unique approach to doing this, which included taking, though we did move further into the setback in the front, interestingly with this design, we actually reduced the total number of parking spots to 83. The number of parking spots in front of the building reduced from 87, and we increased the number of parking spaces in the setback from 19 to 30. So we had 2 decreases and 1 increase. I'd like to stop here for just a second and ask Kyle Clark from Beta to speak. So Kyle, are you there and could you speak?
Yeah. Hey, good evening, everyone. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, Don. And we reviewed this internally, and I just wanted to take 1-2 minutes to kind of brief a couple thoughts on it. And Don had asked me, and apologies for putting you on the spot, to just simply kind of accept the direction that the board was providing to us to modify the parking to meet the letter, better meet the letter of the law, and minimize the excursions from whatever non-conforming parking exists now. And I'm far from an expert in this kind of stuff. My job is designing airplanes and making them look and fly beautifully, not parking spots in front of the building. But there was one thing that was glaringly obvious to me, and that was that this presentation of a curved parking area makes it look not so long, linear, and ugly. And the worst part about the airport is the lines and lines of linear concrete and the chain link fence that surround it. And we were trying to create something that had natural curves in harmony with the adjacent entryway to the terminal, which you all know is curved, and a road that curves around the front of the terminal. It's called Airport Circle there, not Airport Rectangle, because it curves right into the terminal. And we're the adjacent building from that. And, we see it, our role as Beta here, to take a really ugly old building and on a street that everybody in this community traverses, which is pretty unique. I mean, a lot of these neighborhoods, people never go down the street unless you live there or you know somebody there. Everybody goes down the Airport Ave. And when Don said, just accept this, it's the way it goes, I have a hard time doing it because I think we all know the right thing to do is to provide some vegetation and some greenness between the road and the chain link fence and the lines and lines of concrete out there. And shoving this parking back up against the fence so that we can meet some text that was derived by people that were subjectively creating rules at one point of time, and relieve our ability to provide some suggestive or subjective intuition to create something that is the right solution, because the easy way is to simply take the rules as they are, seems like a bit of a cop-out. And I don't mean to be caustic about it. I'm just trying to provide my assessment that I provided to Don as an alternative way of thinking about what we're trying to present here. So I guess, I just wanted, before we throw out what we believe to be the right thing for the purposes that we're all aligned on, to make sure we have a beautiful town that functions and flows and feels pleasant to be in, as opposed to something that meets, a subjective law that was made in times past when everything could not have been considered, and apply our ability here as a board. And in my interpretation of the rules is that you have the unique ability to say, we're at an airport, there's no parking room behind it. The best presentation is the one that we will accept, or don't accept it, and we will be stuck without any updates to the building. But if we're going to move forward and dump a whole lot of money into something like this building, in my opinion, we should make sure that it's the best presentation possible, and it both fits the presence we're trying to create, and not take the rule and just bend something into it, which is a lesser presentation. So I just want to compel Don and others to think more about something that we presented last week and less about something that is simply designed to meet what's on a paper and not what's real here at this office that I'm in.
Thank you, Kyle.
So Matt, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish what you're saying.
Well, my sentence was really pretty simple. I think, the original plan was that we offered here, we think was the most efficient use of the land. It allows easy accessibility to an employee area that is no longer, would not be constricted by cars. You wouldn't feel like you're in a parkway. I think those are benefits. I think there's an island added in the south end of the entrance, which would improve people coming on and off of Airport Drive, that I think should be considered in this. And that it was just an ingenious use of a very limited amount of space. And one of the notes Marla had was her concern in doing this was there was going to be the removal of some mature trees, and that is true. Under this original plan, there were 16, existing, there are 16 mature trees, but in the new plan, there are 21. So yes, there is the removal of some mature trees, but we are planting a significant number of new trees in this area that you see designated here up against Airport Drive in the drawing on the right. And again, I think it is our contention that the Development Review Board may approve parking between a public street and one or more buildings if the board finds that one or more of these criteria are met. And I believe Marla mentioned that there was one, I think she said two. I think that there might even be a third one that was mentioned at the last, is that we do have some unique site conditions. So before we offer these other two options, which we're very much prepared to do this evening, I just wanted to bring this in front of you one more time and ask for the board to consider this. Again, if not, then we're just going to move on.
But you did put some thought, Don, into what Kyle described as a lesser idea. Do you want to show us that before we?
Yes, absolutely. So in the submission that went in, before this existing conditions plan on the left, Delilah, if you will back up to the C101 drawing. Other direction. There we go. And if you could enlarge that, please. So we have two options that we have taken here, and they both have an interesting impact on this entire this entire plan. First, I'd like to mention that on the right-hand side of this drawing, which is a lot that they call the Uber lot, there are 34 parking spaces in that lot. They are all currently non-conforming. This plan makes some very minor corrections to that, but there are 34 unconforming spots then, there are 34 unconforming spots now. There is a little bit of change along the east side of the lot, not on the street side. So as you move towards the front of the building, we had two scenarios. One was with a 10-foot buffer in front of the building, and one with a 15-foot buffer in front of the building, which if you enlarge it a little more, please, Delilah, this one I think shows us the 10-foot buffer. One more time, please. One more enlargement if you could. Okay, so if you look sort of left center over there, you'll see a little note that says there's a 10-foot buffer there. So we came up with a 10-foot buffer as an absolute minimum of space we need in front of the building. We have existing structures that stick out about 6 or 7 feet on the front of the building that are being reused. We also have some heating and ventilating equipment that is going to be sitting in that green space there, that in front of the building, that will stick out about 7 or 8 feet. So our concern is that we feel like this approach is not a wise one in light of maintenance of the building and the amount of compliance between this one and the 15-foot setback, which I'll show you in a minute, is almost identical. So if you could go then, Delilah, to the next picture. It has the 15-foot setback. And if you could enlarge that, please. So we're not even going to discuss the lot over to the right because it isn't really pertinent. But what I'd like to note here is that in the original submission, we came up with as I mentioned before, there were a total of 85 parking spots. Excuse me, in the existing is 85 parking spots. In that submission you looked at, you're looking at on the right, there are 83. In the 15-foot drive offset, there are 87, and in the 10-foot drive offset, there are a total of 93 parking spaces. So the existing building right now has 39 spaces in front of it. The original submission we showed you on the right it has 37. In the 15-foot drive offset, there are 42 spaces in front of the building, and in the 10-foot drive, there are 39 spaces. So from existing, we go down to the original submission and then up a little bit for the 15-foot offset, but the 10-foot offset has this exact same number of spaces in front of the building. The number of spaces in the setback varies some. So, and if you could move this a little bit to the left, Delilah, if that would be possible. Just a little further, please. Thank you. That's fine. Again, you're noting the 50-foot setback here, and you can see on the far right-hand side, it comes very close to the building. This is with a 15-foot offset, which allows us a much more gracious amount of space in front of the building. It also allows us to plant full-size trees. And Carolyn's drawing, if you look in the upper right-hand corner there, you'll see that that's basically with about a 15-foot offset space in front of the building. Allows us to plant some full-size trees, some tall grasses, and to properly screen and protect our heating and ventilating equipment. And then if you go back to the drawing on the left, you will see that this is our 15-foot offset. We have a 10-foot offset. This is the 15-foot one. You can see that there are, no matter how we do this, no matter how we orient this parking in front of the building, we are in the setback. The existing is in the setback. The original proposed one is in the setback. The 10-foot or the 15-foot offset from the building leaves us with much of this parking in the setback. Part of the issue that Marla raised, which we can talk about later, is this parking all the way in the left-hand side. So, Matt, we came up with two what we consider to be reasonable solutions that reduced the amount of impact on the setback, though they are not dramatically different than what is there now. And they're very linear, and I don't find them very creative, and I don't find them a really, as Kyle said, I don't think they really correctly reflect what you're capable of doing here. And we'd like to do what the board is capable of allowing us to do. That's it.
Well, so Don, so this is sketch, so we're not taking a formal vote here, but you're here to get the sense of the board and their opinions, and I'll state mine. You know, the lot contains one or more existing buildings that are to be reused, and parking needs cannot be accommodated to the rear and sides of the existing buildings. Check. There are planes behind the buildings. Now, what it says is if one or more of these criteria are met, the board shall approve only the minimum necessary to overcome the conditions. So then we're talking about a number, and I think there's maybe different ideas on what that number is. But when we look at staff comment number 1, staff recommends the board provide feedback to the applicant that either of these configurations, excepting the 6 spaces to the north, would be acceptable. So let's highlight the 6 spaces one more time, could we? 6 spaces to the north, these are the 6 which expand the nonconformity. So those are those right there.
Well, except that from my understanding is if they're not in a setback, they don't expand the nonconformity.
I think that needs a little bit of a correction. So there's a nonconformity. The nonconformity here is that the parking is between the building and the street.
Mm-hmm.
Has nothing to do with the front setback.
Okay. So then, by the logic of that, if we reduce the number of parking spaces in front of the building, then we are actually improving the nonconformity, regardless of whether or not they're in the setback.
Yeah,
Is that right?
we call that decreasing the amount of nonconformity.
Yeah. So our original plan is the one plan of all of these that actually decreases the number of spaces in front of the building.
It's, okay. In the staff comments, I think it's probably in there explicitly. Parking shall be located to the rear or sides of a building. It does not say parking spaces. It talks about parking areas throughout 14.06B2. The board has historically interpreted that to be the area of the space used for parking, not the number of parking spaces, because it doesn't say the parking spaces, it says parking areas throughout 14.06B2.
Is a roadway a parking area?
If you were to have a drive aisle with no parking on either side of it, it would not be a parking area. But consider, your typical parking layouts, as an engineer, you put on your plan 60-foot wide blocks. It's 18, 24, 18. That's a parking area.
So, so my question is very specific. In this situation, is this drive-through area considered part of the parking, as part of the parking area?
My interpretation would be yes.
Okay.
Can I
All right.
chime in real quick, Don? This is Chris Gendron from Stantec. I just have
Please,
a
Chris.
burning question I need to ask. So if it is based on area, if I was to measure the pavement area in the proposed design that we're showing on the top right, and measured the area of the existing pavement from the existing site, and our proposed design had less pavement for parking, would that meet that requirement?
So that would be where I would turn to the board. I have a very specific memory of the board denying a request to put pavement in the location where there was not pavement before, even though the total area was reduced, because it was expanding the nonconformity into a location it was not before. That was the interpretation the board made in that situation. And I would ask the board whether they would like to diverge from that interpretation in this case, or whether they would like to remain consistent.
Board, do you have any comments?
It's
I'd
John.
like to- go ahead.
It's John. I find, I think Don's right. The first plan is the most attractive plan. I think there is plenty of good reasons to speak to in terms of the building and the confines of the space. I understand Marla's concern about expanding a non-conforming. I think this plan has reasons to make it happen. So I don't have a problem with it.
This is Brian. I want to agree with John. I was also going to say, I'm sort of channeling Frank Kochman here, in the sense that just because we did something one time doesn't mean that we're bound to do it forever. I honestly don't remember the application that Marla was referencing. It may have been before I got on the board, but I think this particular application shows me why we should exercise the flexibility that I believe we can.
Thank you, Brian. Jim, Alyssa, Mark?
Matt, I'll offer my comments on this. Obviously we've had a lot of discussion about parking in the front of buildings and expanding non-conforming. Without wanting to diverge from what we've done in the past, I really do want to find a way to make this one work, because everything they're doing is improving the aesthetic look of the site. By keeping the parking the way it was previously configured, you don't get as much green space up against the building, which is going to continue to soften the aesthetic of the building from the street. Curving the road in brings more green space between the parking and the tarmac behind it, which is going to further soften this, the site and improve the aesthetics. I guess one question I would ask is, and again, I guess what I'm looking for is some give and take here. Could we lose a few parking spaces in the front to increase some of the green space? Would there be some give and take here? Because I've looked at it and I'm wondering, if we were to pull the parking in on either north and south curb cut area in one or two spaces, and maybe directly across from the pavers, make that all green, you really would, improve and increase the amount of green space from the street. I'm looking at losing about 6 or 7 spaces in the front. I think that would greatly improve how the parking lot would look from the street from an amount of pavement. And I wonder if the applicant could live with that.
There is no parking requirement for the building.
Correct.
And I would think that reducing the amount of parking on either end of this turnout would be an acceptable solution. We would continue to decrease the amount of the actual amount of non-conforming space, I believe. I would have some difficulty with the area directly in front of the building, only in light of the fact that is one of the things we need to do is we want to make it so that people who come to this building as guests and visitors, not just employees, have the easiest route to get to the building. We don't want them to have to park away from the site and come here. So we do need to supply to Beta, both short-term and long-term, as much parking as we can get in the front of the building. So I certainly would have not a moment's hesitation to agree on reducing the amount of parking by maybe 2 spots on each side, but in the middle, I guess I need to understand the logic of why you think that would change it very much in the street view. I could see it at either end, but not so much in the middle.
I think because right now you have, in that whole length of that curved stretch of parking, which is all non-conforming essentially, you have one landscape island. And if you were to come in, as Marla, did you draw the yellow on the plan?
I did.
Okay, Delia. I think that, especially with what you're trying to do with this site, with the landscaping, with the improved green space, if you were to fill in all the parking spaces directly across from that paver entrance area, you still have ample parking on either side of that paver area for visitors coming to the site. And it's really reducing the length of asphalt run in the non-conforming area. And I personally think that kind of, for me, is an acceptable trade-off for allowing that additional parking and asphalt into expanding a non-conforming use by doing that trade-off, in my mind.
Okay, understood.
Okay, Jim, Melissa, Don?
Makes sense to me, Mark and Matt.
Any other comments? Okay, this is sketch plan, so we're not taking a formal vote on it, but does the applicant have any other questions from the board regarding going forward with preliminary plat?
Yeah, Matt, this is Kyle, and apologies for my naivete on this, but if we come forward when we are doing whatever hearing happens to result in a vote, and we present something that's up on the right, can we get an indication that if that will be accepted or not? I will tell you that I'm not a big fan of, there's a point at which we can continue to remove the spots when we know this is the right form to take, and it's the balance that we attempted to achieve. And there's a point at which removing spots makes the system not work as a whole. So I'm curious to know, if we come back and we present the plan to the right, if that will or won't be accepted, of course, and if it's acceptable for me to ask that question, so that we can walk into this next thing efficiently and educated.
Yeah, no, that's an important question and a right question to ask. And this is where, we don't create a formal hearing. We're not asking you to swear in. You're here to get a sense of our understanding of the project and our recommendation before you come forward. And I think what I'm hearing is that we understand the reasons for doing it the way you described. And while I can't speak for the other board members, and I can't hold a vote on this because it's sketch, I think you're hearing from a majority of those on the board that they support this plan. But we're not.
Matt, this is Jim. I'll just chime in that I would agree with John and Brian's comments from earlier, just to give another voice to that.
Yeah. So what you're hearing, Kyle, is that you've got a development review board that wants to make this work, and we'd encourage you to come to back to preliminary plat with this plan.
All right. Thanks a bunch.
I have no other questions.
Is there anyone in the public that would like to comment on SD 2015? If so, either signify in the chat box or say your name. Okay, seeing none, then I hope to see you all, Don and Kyle and Chris and others at preliminary plat.
We're very excited to do that. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the time. Thanks for sticking around so late.
Okay, so now we go to agenda item number 13, which is the minutes from April 28th and May 5th. Has everyone had a chance to read the minutes from those two DRB hearings? I'm assuming that's a yes. So I would take a motion that we approve the minutes from April 28th and May 5th, 2020. Is there a second? Seconded by John. We do this by voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, moving on to 14, other business. I don't know if anyone has any other business. One question I had for Marla or Delilah. We had numerous questions in the chat box. Are those recorded or put into the public record, or they just exist as a recorded? In other words, if someone put something in the chat box on Zoom or GoToMeeting, would it be implied that that would be entered into the public record that could be answered by staff or by the board at a later date? I'm thinking specifically about some of the comments I read, but or questions that were asked in the chat box related to one of the earlier projects.
Yep, so the meeting's recorded, and that chat log is recorded. We'll have it available, but I don't necessarily have a mechanism for
like copying and pasted into a document.
Yeah, I don't have a mechanism for transcribing it to like a document, but I'll make a point to save that as an attachment to my notes from this meeting so that we will have it. And I don't know what Channel 17 has showing when they're recording, whether it shows up kind of on the sidebar or if they don't catch it. But staff will have those available.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else with any other business?
No.
Oh, okay. It was a long night. Thank you all for hanging in there. Tremendous amount of work. And that concludes the Development Review Board for May 19th. See
Stay
you all
safe,
next.
everyone.